जी बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम कुल अल्लाहु अहद अल्लाहुस समद लम यलिद वलम यूलद वलम युकल लहू कुफुवन अहद. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending this today's session, which is on the sustainable reporting. And I would also like to thank and welcome all of you over here, participants who are there on Zoom, our esteemed speakers, guest speakers, panelists, council members, and SRC members as well. So in today's session, there will be a discussion on the sustainable reporting, and this will provide a platform to learn about the exposure drafts which ISSB is going to issue. And this is going to be a very informative session. We have a series of sessions on this the new standards. Then we have a panel discussion, and it will be followed by a Q&A session as well. To start the proceedings, first I would like to invite Mr. Osama Rashid to come forward and have some few words with us. Mr. Osama has been elected as a chairman of the Southern Regional Committee. He's a business leader, entrepreneur, technologist, and a management professional. He's a founder of the chief executive of V2F Solution, a tech consulting-based company. He has a diversified experience over more than 25 years. I would like to invite Mr. Osama Rashid as the chairman to start the proceedings.
Thank you, Salman. Dr. Shamshad, Farooq Saab, Fahim Saab, council members, Khalid Saab, esteemed panelists, speakers, participants, also participants on Zoom, Assalamu alaikum, and a warm welcome from my side. At the outset, I would like to congratulate all of you that you have opted to attend this seminar on this very important subject of sustainability. And because you're going to learn and listen to from leaders, thought leaders, and esteemed panelists, and some thought-provoking views on the topic of sustainability. I'm also thankful to our technical directorate and our SRC CPD team for taking this initiative or for organizing this seminar on this important activity, on this important subject rather. And which has always been very important. However, thankfully, it is gaining more and more attention nowadays. I would like to keep my interaction with you brief, but I would just like to touch upon few of the aspects which our eminent speakers and panelists would be covering in their sessions. And starting from the very basic question, like what is sustainability? Why is sustainability important? What is sustainability reporting? Who is responsible for that? And how can we make sustainability reporting reliable and comparable? How can we have targets about sustainability which are, realistic, achievable, and at the same time, we are looking into the future as well in terms of achieving sustainability. So these are the few basic questions I would, our speakers would be covering and panelists would be covering in their sessions. Going forward, there are few challenges as well, which needs to be, which should be addressed. And starting basically from the challenge of, in terms of reporting, that, sustainability reporting should not be considered as an end, rather a means to reach the end goal of achieving sustainability. So, it happens that every focus goes on reporting, and the real goal is missed somewhere. And in one of the articles of Harvard Business Review, they have mentioned that reporting is not a proxy for progress. So you can very well understand that yes, you should not be done like that. Then there have been challenges in terms of establishing direct links between financial performance and sustainability metrics. And this is a challenge, that how to incentivize or create incentives for investors for achieving sustainability. And this leads to leads me to giving few recommendations as well at this forum for consideration and deliberations. And these are basically like organizations, especially the large organizations and entities, they have a responsibility on their shoulders to help their vendors and other business partners in achieving sustainability in their organizations. And so, being elders and seniors, I think they have a bigger role to play. Then I think sustainability should be embedded into mainstream business and it should be a strong pillar of decision-making process in organizations. That is also very important, which should be done. Also, in order to push sustainability measures, governments should, introduce measures in terms of compliance with the regulatory framework, where compliance to certain standards of sustainability should be made, mandatory, also auditable as well, and incentivize also, following those sustainability standards. For example, having some tax benefits for organizations that have reached certain levels of sustainability, and those standards are measurable and also auditable as well. And lastly, there's a need to also train accountants and also auditors as well, that they are able to, so that we are able to have a right, reliable reporting mechanism, and also it is auditable as well at the same time. So this is where our role comes in terms of having, a true reporting of sustainability metrics, and also, creating reliability of those metrics. So thank you very much, all of you, and I welcome once again all of you, and looking forward for mutual learning together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Osama. For our friends who are there on Zoom, if you have any questions during the presentations and the panel discussion, please write on the chat box. And during the Q&A session, you can raise your hand as well and ask any further questions. So to move forward with the proceedings, I would now like to invite Mr. Sohail Malik, who is going to talk on the IFRS Sustainability Standard 1. Sohail is a director in the technical services of ICAP. He's a fellow chartered accountant with overall experience of more than 23 years. Prior to joining ICAP, Sohail has worked with leading accountancy firms in senior management role. He has represented ICAP at various national and international forums, and is ICAP's technical advisor at Asia Oceania Standard Setters Group. So please welcome Mr. Sohail Malik.
Thank you, Salman. Assalamu alaikum. It is recognized that sustainability standards and reporting would be something that's new for many of us. However, the international developments in this area are moving at a very fast pace, and sustainability standards are on the horizon. We would be discussing the two standards that have been issued by the International Sustainability Standards Board. And the final set of these standards are expected by end of this year. So just to explain the context in which these international developments are taking place and the push for sustainability reporting, I would start with a brief introduction of International Sustainability Standards Board, because the establishment of this board is a critical milestone in the journey towards investor-driven sustainability reporting. I will also touch upon the board's approach towards the development of the standards, and then we will move to the exposure draft, the IFRS S1 or Sustainability Standard number 1, which outlines the general requirements for the preparation of sustainability reports. And in slides, I will highlight the core content and the key aspects of this standard. So to starting with International Sustainability Standards Board, that what's it's all about. So we need to understand that who has been demanding the sustainability reporting. And basically the investors have been asking for and demanding for complete, comparable, consistent and verifiable sustainability reporting so that they can make more informed decisions about investments in entities. So the push was coming from the investors, and though various organizations have been working in this area, for example, Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, TCDF, Value Reporting Foundation, there are many organizations who have been working on sustainability and developing the frameworks and the standards. But because of the presence of these organizations, there was fragmented approach. So the information that was provided by the companies on different frameworks was not comparable, it was inconsistent. And as a result, investors were not able to make, you can say, more informed decisions based on the prospects and sustainability of the entities. And as the investors also pointed out that the information that's provided in the financial statements is not sufficient, is not complete, and they need additional information on the long-term prospects of the entities. The solution to this need or problem was provided by the IFRS Foundation. And IFRS Foundation in November 2021, last year, announced the establishment of International Sustainability Standards Board. The idea behind the establishment of the board is to develop sustainability standards that meet the needs of the investors. And the board would be basically consolidating the work of the organizations that have been previously working in this space. So they would primarily not be reinventing the wheel, rather they would be consolidating the existing frameworks and focusing on the information that can contribute to the or fulfill the needs of the investors. And because this board has been established under the IFRS Foundation, so the idea is again to put sustainability reporting on the same footing as the financial reporting. So in this way, the companies will be ultimately, you can say, held responsible for sustainability reporting as they are for the financial reporting. So this is the objective of establishment of the board. The board has also support and endorsement of leading economies and regulators from various jurisdictions. And it is expected that the set of standards that this forum would be issuing in near future, the final set of standards, would be adopted by various jurisdictions. And ultimately, we can say that like in financial reporting, the IFRS accounting standards are common language for financial reporting across the countries, across the borders. The standards issued by this forum would become a common language for sustainability reporting. Well, sustainability has no single definition, and I was reading an article where it was quoted that there are probably over 200 explanations or definitions of sustainability. And ISSB or the board has not proposed a definition of sustainability. However, it has highlighted that the ESG risks and opportunities that impact the enterprise value of an entity are linked to sustainability. SASB, which was a forum which has been developing standards, industry-specific sustainability standards, it also explained sustainability on the lines that it's the corporate activities that maintain or enhance the ability of the company to create value. So sustainability is linked to something that creates or maintains the value of the entity. Well, when we talk about sustainability reporting, then it would be the management, measurement, and reporting of sustainability related risks and opportunities that could affect the enterprise value. I'm mentioning the enterprise value for the reason that these standards are focused towards investors, and investor decision making is linked to enterprise value. I will explain in the coming slides more about the enterprise value and how investors can now use this information on sustainability along with the financial reporting to make informed or better choices. So to summarize that, what is the focus of ISSB? ISSB's focus is to develop a baseline, that's the minimum set of sustainability related information that the entities should provide. And by baseline, it also means that the jurisdictions and regulators can enhance or improve or add, I would say, to these minimum requirements that have been set. It will be consolidating the work of existing organizations like TCDF, like SASB, So as I mentioned that it would not be again working or developing new standards, rather it would be initiating its work from the existing resources. And it would also be using the human capital of these organizations, as it has inducted the resources from these organizations within ISSB. And the objective of ISSB would be investor driven or investor relevant information. Like financial reporting is investor driven. It provides information to the primary users of financial statements who are providers of finance, whether it's in the form of lenders or creditors. So again, the information about sustainability through these standards would be focused towards investors, so that investors can make decisions in combination by reviewing or by studying the financial statements of an entity as well as its sustainability report. So the sustainability report will provide the long-term prospects of the entity, whereas financial reporting would be primarily providing the historical information about the entities. So the combination of two would provide the overall value of the organizations. And lastly, sustainability reporting would be integrated with the financial reporting in the way that the reports generated or the sustainability reporting would be for the same entity, for the same period, and at the same time. So for example, if the entity has an annual year end, let's say December, so it would be producing sustainability report along with the financial statements. Now moving towards IFRS sustainability disclosure standards, the approach highlighted by the board is that it's a building block approach. The building blocks approach means that the financial reporting developed by different bodies or boards. For example, it can be IFRS based, developed by ISB or GAAP, US GAAP, along with the sustainability disclosures or information that's provided under the standards would provide the information about the enterprise value. And then when these two sets of information or reports are available, then investors can evaluate the entity and compare one entity with another. Whereas the need for the information need of other stakeholders, jurisdictions can consider to add or put in further requirements. For example, they can consider the GRI framework or other frameworks just to add on to the requirements. But primarily the investor-driven information would be available within the sustainability reporting. That would be is based on the ISSB standards, and the financial statements that are either based on IFRS or US GAAP. So on the basis of a recognized framework. So this is the building block approach of ISSB. In terms of the architecture of the standards, the standards that ISSB has proposed and would be developing in future. So they have started with a general standard, which is IFRS S1, which I would be explaining in the coming slides. And then they would be developing, they have developed and they would be further developing thematic standards. So thematic means they have developed a standard on climate disclosures. They would also identify other themes on which standards or disclosures around sustainability risks and opportunities could be relevant. So for example, around water as an example. So they might come out with a standard on water and other themes. And then they will also develop standards or issue standards that are industry specific. So there could be a certain disclosure requirements that could be only required for the, let's say, financial sector, or there could be different disclosure requirements for the industrial manufacturing entity, for a textile manufacturer. So they would be coming out with the industry specific requirements. Because earlier I mentioned that they are primarily consolidating the work that has already been done. So SASB, Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, has already developed industry-specific standards, and they have developed standards for 77 different industries. So those standards are available with ISSB, and ISSB as a starting point would be using those standards and issuing the standards for which are industry specific. So this is the idea of ISSB, and they would be moving on these lines. So far, they have issued, as we know, 2 standards. One is a general standard, and other is a thematic standard on the climate. And we are discussing both the standards in today's session. In terms of the layout or content of the standards, basically, again, using the work of an organization that has been involved in sustainability-related framework development, that is TCDF, they have utilized the TCFT, they have utilized the work that has been done by TCFT, and the standards that we would be looking today and in future as well would be based around these 4 pillars. So entities would be required to provide information about the governance, strategy, risk management, and lastly the targets and metrics around sustainability risks and opportunities. And I would explain these in context of IFRS S1, the first standard, and then in the next presentation we will have a more detailed look around climate related disclosures. So every standard that ISSB would issue would cover or require entities to provide information around these 4 areas. And then there would be some specific disclosure requirements for each theme or industry. So to start with IFRS S1 or Sustainability Disclosure Standard 1, which outlines the general requirements for the preparation of sustainability reports or reporting. It requires the entities to provide material information about significant sustainability related risks and opportunities that could impact the enterprise value. And enterprise value is explained by ISSB as sum of market value, that's market capitalization of an entity, and its net debt. So basically this is the value which an investor is considering when making a, let's say, buying decision about the entity or selling decision about the entity. It's the value of the organization that's considered by the investor. So there are a few concepts in these lines. So one is material, the second is significant, and then the significant risk and opportunities, and lastly enterprise value, as I mentioned. So material, I will explain further in another slide. So material is primarily conceptually similar to what we consider for the financial reporting. So any information that is if omitted or misconstrued or could impact the decision making of the investors. So material is on the similar lines. Significant, then if something is significant, then it will become material. So for example, climate is identified as a topic which could have some sort of impacts on an entity. So first the entity will consider the topic, then it will consider the risks that can arise from the climate. For example, it will consider that whether because of the rising temperatures there could be any impact on the operations of the entity, or because of some changes in the laws related to climate or emissions, there could be an impact on the entity or not. So then the entity will identify the risks, and then the entity would consider whether those risks are significant or not. And if they are significant, then the entity will provide the material information about those risks or opportunities. In terms of, these are the risks. So an example of an opportunity could be that, for example, the rising temperature can be an example. Because of the rising temperature, an entity might have an opportunity to develop some sort of technology. So it can innovate and come out with some new technology, and it can market or sell that. So it's an opportunity for an entity. Similarly, entities who are in the agriculture sector might consider growing crops twice a year because of the temperatures, rising temperatures, and they can use the temperatures for their benefit. So this is an example of an opportunity that can be linked to sustainability or ESG related area. And enterprise value, as I mentioned, because the focus of sustainability reporting is towards investors. So they have linked that this information would be relevant if it's impacting the enterprise value. In terms of the content of the standard, I have listed down the key aspects that have been discussed within the standard. So it discusses the reporting entity, reporting period, and the statement of compliance, the disclosures. This is an important aspect. Then materiality, use of estimates, the core contents, etc. So I would be discussing or highlighting some aspects in coming slides. So starting with the explanation that how it's connected to financial reporting, because as I mentioned that it's investor driven, so the information has to be provided at the same time when the financial statements are provided. So it's in this way linked to the financial reporting or corporate reporting. Firstly, it's applicable to all frameworks. So if an entity is preparing financial statements as per US GAAP, or for example, as per IFRS for SMEs or any other framework, it can use these standards. So these are, you can say, financial reporting neutral standards can be used by all the entities. Then I mentioned that it's for the same entity that is preparing the financial statements. So the same entity, same reporting period, and for the same timeline. So the information has to be disseminated along with the financial statements. And lastly, it's connected with the financial reporting because entities with the corporate reporting, because the entities generally provide general purpose financial reporting information to the market, and sustainability reporting would be part of that. So the core contents of the standard. There are 4 core contents, and these are based on TCFD framework. As I explained earlier, that the structure of the standard would include these 4 contents. So IFRS S1 or Sustainability Standard 1 highlights that the entity needs to disclose information about its governance, strategy, risk management, and targets and metrics. In terms of strategy governance, it needs to highlight that who is responsible for sustainability related risks and opportunities. So if I can give an example, the board of directors are responsible for overseeing the company, and then an entity might disclose that under the board there's a specific committee that is looking into sustainability related areas. So it could be named as an example, risk management committee or a sustainability committee. So the entities need to provide this information, and then they also need to provide information about the role of the management, how management is involved in sustainability related risks and opportunities. So management might be involved through their daily operations. So there needs to be an explanation about the role of the management. Then moving towards strategy. Under the strategy, the entities would require disclosure that's around the significant risks and opportunities that they have identified. What's the impact of those risks and opportunities? What is the time horizon? And how the entity has modeled or structured strategy to handle the risks and opportunities. So for example, if we say that climate was a topic again, and the risks identified could be regulatory, there could be regulatory changes. The risks identified could be floods or rising temperatures. These could be the examples of risks. Then the entity would be required to provide the impact of these risks. So what could be the impact of rising temperature or flood? So, and again, an example could be there could be supply chain disruptions. There could be higher cost of production. So these are sort of risks that can be linked to the impacts that can be linked to the risks. Then the entity will provide its strategy to handle those risks. So this would be the flow of information. Entities would also be required to provide their resilience, that that how much resilient they are to the risk, and for this they would have to provide information based on the scenarios. So for example, if the temperature is increasing by 2 degrees, so what could be the impact on their operations, on their entire value chain, and vice versa, if the temperature increases by 5%, what could be the impact? So in this way, they have to provide information under the strategy, and they also need to provide information about the time horizon. For example, if the rising temperatures is an example of risk, then what's the time horizon on which they can consider that it is going to impact them? So let's say it can impact them for in coming 20 years or in 30 years. So they have to consider that as well. Around strategy, information would also be required in terms of the financial planning of entity. So what could be the financial impact of these risks on entity? As an example, if there could be obsolescence of assets, there could be increased costs. So they also need to factor in that. They might require acquisition of some new resources in terms of technology, etc. So they need to provide information in the strategy portion. Risk management is basically, again, the sustainability risks that have been identified, and how management evaluates those risks, how management considers the impact and prioritizes those risks. So generally, entities have enterprise risk management, and then they would be considering that what sustainability risks or opportunities can be factored in the risk management process, how what could be the impact of those elements. So entire process needs an explanation within the sustainability report. Moving towards the targets and matrices, then the entity would be required to provide information about targets. So for example, if the target is to reduce emissions by a certain percentage, the entity would be disclosing that information. And then the entity would also be providing information that how it's meeting those targets. So has it decreased or not in the year or not, it will disclose that. So the targets and metrics would be more of a qualitative information, quantitative information on the significant areas. So to give you an example, I think Fahimza will further explain this on the climate-related presentation. If emissions are at certain level, then entity would provide information that what are the sources of these emissions, how it's going to cut down the numbers in the coming periods, and what's the time horizon for achieving the targets. Some of the key aspects of the standard are that it's for the reporting entity is the same entity that is preparing the financial statements. So for example, if an entity is preparing standalone separate financial statements as well as consolidated financial statements, so it would be considered reporting entity for 2 sets of financial statements, and it would be preparing a sustainability report for itself as well as a sustainability report on the consolidated basis. The sustainability report has to be for the same period. The standard outlines that it has to be on the annual basis. It does not mention interim period. So the idea is that annual reporting would be required. However, jurisdictions can prescribe other time periods. The concept of materiality is primarily similar to what we have in the financial statements, and it is anything that would impact the decision maker and it's linked to the enterprise value. However, I think this is an area which we can discuss with during the Q&A session, because how this materiality under the sustainability reporting would interact with the financial reporting materiality. So this can be discussed during the Q&A session. Then the entities, if they have complied with the sustainability standards, or they can mention that they have complied, like we do in the financial reporting. And in terms of the comparative information would be generally required. However, there are 2 exceptions. One, when we would be adopting for the first time. So in the first year of adoption, comparative information would not be required, and it might not be required in case we are not able to provide information in the coming periods. So any item that cannot be disclosed or the data is not available for the earlier period, there's an exception. In terms of identification of relevant disclosures, another important aspect of the standard is that it requires information about the complete value chain. So if an entity has sustainability related risks, it means that it has to consider the upstream, downstream, and the environment as well as its own operations. So the risks that it is facing because of its operations, the risks that it might face because of its, for example, suppliers, the risks it could face because of its customers, and as by environment we can say that the government's intervention. So all these factors need to be considered when evaluating the sustainability risks, and I think it's, in my view, one of the most challenging aspect of the requirements. So in terms of relevant disclosures, the hierarchy is similar to what we have in accounting standards in IAS 8. So we will be starting with the general requirements, then we will move to the specific requirement that discusses that area. So for example, we have the climate related standard. This is the ISSB standard. And in case some information or some areas identified on which so far ISSB has not issued a standard, then the entities would need to consider the information or literature that's available in other frameworks. So they would be looking at SASB, they would be looking at industry practice, they would be also required to look at ISSB guidance. So the idea is similar to financial reporting, but because this is a new topic, so again, this would be a challenge. In terms of where the sustainability information can be provided, the board in the proposed standard has not specified any location. So it can be provided as an example within the management commentary in the annual report. So normally we provide management commentary along with the financial statements in the annual report. So it can be covered in the management commentary. It can also be provided separately in the form of a sustainability report, independent or separately from the management commentary or and financial statements. However, what is required is that there should be a linkage between the information that's provided in the sustainability report and the financial statements. So anything that's impacting the financial statements because of sustainability related risks and opportunities needs to be linked. In terms of presentation, as I mentioned that on each area, the standard requires information about governance, strategy, risk management, and matrix. So the matrix, for example, one area would be different from others, and similarly, strategy on one area might be different from the other. So entity can provide separately. So for example, climate related areas could be covered separately in terms of strategy, risk management, and governance, or they can provide the general information about governance, and then they can specifically segregate the information about strategy. So this is up to entities that whatever they feel best. In terms of the effective date of IFRS 1, the effective date has not been prescribed by the board. It would be up to the jurisdiction and the regulators to consider the effective date. So in Pakistan, the relevant regulator would need to consider the readiness of the entities, and then they can go for a specific date. Because as I mentioned, it is generally and globally recognized that this is a new area for many companies and individuals. So that's why they have not mentioned a specific date. However, as I mentioned, the final set of standards are expected in next 6 to 8 months. So by end of this year, they have mentioned that they will be issuing the final set of these 2 standards that have been proposed. Whether the requirements of sustainability or reporting of sustainability has to be audited, again, it's not the sustainability board's mandate to prescribe audit-related requirements. The idea is that the local jurisdictions or regulators will prescribe the assurance-related requirements. However, the International Auditing and Assurance Standard Board is working aggressively on this topic, and it's part of their work plan. So, similar to what ISSB is doing around sustainability reporting, the Auditing and Assurance Standards Board that issues the international standards on auditing and assurance, etc., they are working on this area. We have ISA 3000. We also have ISA 3410 on greenhouse emissions, etc., their assurance. But they're also working that how to improve the existing standards and whether to bring in new standards that would be focusing on specific areas, and how, what sort of challenges auditors might face when they would be auditing the sustainability related reporting. So they are working on that. So this ends my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sohail, for a very insightful presentation. Our next keynote speaker is Dr. Shamshad Akhtar. She is an economist and has a broad-based development experience in a range of senior positions at the national and multinational organizations. She served as the caretaker finance minister of Pakistan, holding multiple economic portfolios in caretaker government and as the governor State Bank of Pakistan. Dr. Shamshad Akhtar served as a Vice President, MENA region for the World Bank and Director General of the Asian Development Bank as well. She is a doctorate and a postdoctorate degree in the economics from the University of Harvard. Presently, she is the chairperson of the board of the Pakistan Stock Exchange, PICG, Karandas and Sui Southern Gas Company Limited, and an independent director in the Angro Fertilizer Limited. Please welcome Dr. Shamshad Akhtar.
Okay, I needed to help myself to be able to be seen across. Huh? So first of all, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum to everybody. I think I'm not being an accountant and not being affiliated with IFRS or with the sustainability reporting, I'm not sure how much sense will I make to this particular audience who's very specialized. I can just share with you a few thoughts. I'm here because we have been working on ESG at the PSX and PICG, but also because I have been involved in the sustainable development, finance, and Paris Accord matters from, say, 2014 onwards very intensively, and was involved very heavily prior to that, even in the negotiations of it. My first message, and I'll have 5-6 messages, but first one is that we are sitting in Pakistan, and Pakistan's climate vulnerabilities has brought to forefront sustainability risk. It's also referred as ESG risk, as all of you know. Pakistan being within the top 10 ranked most climate vulnerable countries, we have to worry about the standards of reporting, disclosures, and everything around it. In our corridors, glaciers are already melting, temperatures are rising, and sea level is also rising. So mainstreaming sustainability to promote green and sustainable growth is quite critical. It, of course, calls for developing a substantive agenda by shifting to low carbon pathways, by raising the share of the renewables in our energy mix and reducing our reliance on higher emission fuels, rationalizing sector policy frameworks by abolishing subsidies, pricing, and tax incentive distortions. And all this will come in the disclosure in one form or the other that I'm talking about, because everything that I'm saying will have a material and a financial impact, and how we are going to be able to track the sustainability reporting at the end of the day. So for decades, we have promoted reckless consumption and production in our country, like everywhere else globally. So embracing sustainability across public and private sector to arrest the drift in climate change while mainstreaming climate response in the budgets, finance, and businesses is quite critical. Promoting ESG integration to enhance value creation, something that was just talked about by Sohail, and to nurture business resilience to create gains for shareholders and investors, which in turn has potential to generate demand pressures for ESG and climate action. Managing ESG risks that have negative impact on assets, P&L, and earnings. Conversely, if risks are effectively managed, it will enhance the value proposition and reputation of the companies. So I think the fact that IFRS and the international community have got together to establish this international sustainability reporting standards is extremely powerful tool for us as an economist and developmental people who were involved in developing the goals, targets, and indicators, but are now struggling to see what the impact of all this is in different contexts. So I very much welcome this, and it is amazing that ICAP is at the frontier of not only deciphering what the disclosure drafts are, which will be extremely helpful for non-accountants like us, but also trying to figure out how this will be operationalized within our context. So now turning from the background architecture that I was laying out, I'd like to convey my second message, which is Pakistan's sustainability drive is underway, but progress and impact is uneven. So what we will find very soon when we are unraveling the technicalities of reporting, that actually the database is very weak, and reporting happens when you have database. Sustainability reporting is contingent on, of course, action. So the good news for us is that Pakistan did legislate the Sustainable Development Goals and is working towards its nationally defined contribution scenarios to contribute to the ambitions of the Paris Climate Accord, which, as we know, the scientific evidence is pushing that we have to be extremely ambitious globally. And we are also promoting sustainable finance, which is the bedrock of sustainability and climate resilience. The most exciting was really the Climate Change Act in 2017 to some of us, because prior to that, Environment Ministry was not really functioning. I can't promise you that the climate ministry is functioning, but having dealt with them, at least the good news is that there has been establishment of the Ministry of Climate Change that actually finally approved a climate policy and strategy, which of course underscores climate mitigation and adaptation, safeguarding biodiversity, etc. And imagine we will have to be delving into the sustainability reporting on these scores eventually. So quality of action in Pakistan, being a federated state, is at the provincial and city level. This is the saddest part of our, it's really a major dilemma because there's too much of lack of action on this frontier. When everywhere that I have been looking at, particularly Asia, which has been my specialization, that carbon neutrality starts with the federal government, but then it cascaded down to the states and to the cities. And nothing of this sort has happened. I have presented a paper to the Think 20 of the G20, which actually looked at the carbon neutrality down to the subnational government level. And that matters a lot for what you are going to do in terms of sustainability reporting. This other good news after legislation of the Sustainable Development Goals, Climate Change Act, the ministry, I think the more exciting is the alternative and renewable energy policy plans to raise clean energy share in energy mix to 30%. And some good things are happening, including also the electric vehicle policy. So that gives you some substance there to be looking at. In midst of COVID-19, several refinancing facilities have served different sectors and broadened also the social safety net. But jury is out on their impact on resilience, or for that matter, on sustainability. Now, implementation of SDGs and climate action, which you require for sustainability reporting, it's important to recognize that the core elements of sustainability have been hampered by the lack of leadership, resource constraint, and disruptions caused by COVID-19, which has reversed the progress in poverty reduction and magnified inequalities, and now the growing macroeconomic vulnerabilities in the past few months that entail severe social implications, and city flooding, as we are experiencing, is revealing the infrastructure deficits. Did I do something wrong to be subjected to, or is it a signal to, Asha, please, isko ban kar de. We need to safeguard climate. So managing sustainability and its reporting in federated structure with provinces and cities and handling environment, to me, is the most challenging task that you would face when you are adapting all this to Pakistan. Now, of course, the EU architecture is fascinating, and I have to tell you, as somebody who's been looking at EU and ASEAN, there is phenomenal advancement on all these frontiers. ASEAN, I have worked on myself on the sustainability, but EU is something we all are fascinated because it's a union and there's a lot of emphasis on the climate. So let me move to my third message, having defined our climate challenges and also what we have been doing in Pakistan to lay this, to set the scene out. Now, here comes my core point, the third message. To me, finance has to be a major driver of promoting sustainability, and within that context, ESG integration. It, of course, calls for enhancement of financial policy and regulatory architecture to align with sustainable banking and finance network guidelines, something that was created when I was at the UN. As a step in this direction, the good news is that the State Bank has issued green banking guidelines, and SCCP issued guidelines for green bond, impact investments, and few other things, including the gender bond. Most path-breaking news for all of us is that PSX has joined the League this year of Sustainable Stock Exchanges. It's taken me, since I joined PSX, to bring PSX to move to that frontier. So moving forward, I'm also counting that PSX will join the United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchanges initiative. Now, all this has implication for reporting, because everything that I have talked about, the green banking guidelines, the SCCP advisories, and the PSX joining SEC, World Federation of Stock Exchanges, in trying to develop sustainable stock exchanges, will lay the foundation for the reporting guidelines in different segments of the financial markets of Pakistan. So we had yesterday a session, and I will tell you in what context later on, with a handful of the banks, about 14, 15, the technicians who are involved in sustainability reporting. Now, why did I push for consultation with the banks? Was that banks constitute a large proportion of our financial assets, and not the non-banking sector, which is contrary to the developed country models. And if reporting and regulatory architecture gets right, we will have the ability to price sustainability and ESG risk, which is crucial for the accountants at the end of the day. Banks will come under pressure for promoting sustainable finance from eventually not only the borrowers, but also the lenders, but also from the boards, shareholders, and investors who will demand technical climate disclosure, something that has been talked about. So an analysis of a sample of 18 banks reveals the sustainability in credit approvals has yet to unfold in a major way, and it's only happened in selective banks that do sustainability reviews of their portfolios. Banks are investing in renewables, undoubtedly, for a variety of reasons, and encouraging effective deployment of corporate social responsibility budgets of their own, and some have declared no coal financing, which is a very important step, and have set up mechanisms to evaluate and annually publish impact and sustainability reports. And I have with me now almost 15 sustainability reports, which are not as bad as 600 reporting guidelines globally that exist, which make it very difficult to figure out how do you come up with a consistent, coherent standard, and hence the value proposition of the International Standard Reporting Body, which is going to come up with a consolidated approach to it. So for us who are working on ESG in Pakistan, it's important to work on reporting guidelines as soon as possible so that we are able to measure and evaluate the impact. So building on Code of Corporate Governance and CSR voluntary guidelines, which incorporate elements of ESG, SCCP has now issued a brief note on roadmap of ESG, which was based on the work that we had started of under the ESG task force that I will talk about at the end. And State Bank is also undertaking technical work to this effect. So I think by the time you are unraveling the global sustainability baseline and evaluating that and setting the scene for Pakistan, some additional evidence will emerge, which will be very useful in all this work, as I see. Now, financial markets are the only place where we can realign public savings and capital flows towards sustainable investment by adopting sustainability in risk management frameworks. At the same time, we need to, of course, assess for technical financial disclosure purposes the physical risks from climate change and disasters and the collapse of businesses that follow, and also collapse of supply chains that happen when disasters or climate change unfolds in a bigger manner. And also we have to assess the transition risk that stem from the cost of unsustainable activities, which is likely to go up with the suspension of lending to high emitters and polluters, and if the carbon taxes are imposed as something that is being pushed by the IMF and World Bank and other financial institutions and G20 now. So all this, when eventually takes hold, will trigger loan defaults. Hence, ESG risks need to become an embedded activity in all activities. And ESG and sustainability, to me, are always used interchangeably. So where do I collect my knowledge from is a body of institutions that I have worked in context of my interface with G20, because I was Sherpa and the finance person of the United Nations for 5 years in the G20. So I have seen and worked closely with the Financial Stability Board, less with international accounting bodies, but they have a very important role to play, ranging from IFRS, and now added to it is the newly established International Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. But I have worked with Bank of International Settlements that have embraced now the International Sustainability Accounting Board, and this is pillar 3 of the BIS standards. The network for greening and financial system, which is a body of almost 100 plus central banks, and it's a very powerful body because all the governors are working very closely on this frontier. IASCO is another platform, and the World Federation of Exchange, as I pointed out, is important, but also commodity trading standard setter, or central bankers and heads of stock exchange, all are galvanized by the sustainable financing platforms and UN Global Compact to harness ESG and sustainability. So why have I talked about all these international institutions? Is that Pakistan will have to draw guidance from all these platforms because it's all over the place. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, and everything has to be pulled from all these different parts. So Pakistan has to develop national roadmaps, regulatory frameworks, and guidelines for its industry and the entire value chain, as I see. So let me now come to my 4th message before I conclude, which is, besides the financial markets and financing bodies, or for that matter, the banks or non-banks, I think it's important for us that corporate and financial institutions align and mainstream sustainability in business strategy and in the governance structure. So you all know this much more, but I think there is so much work to be done in Pakistan that I think even if we all worked unitedly as a team, we will be able to make a dent on conceptualizing and understanding this. So industry, businesses, and financial intermediaries need to adjust product and customer portfolios, offer sustainable financing, and incorporate ESG risk in pricing, risk management, in capital charge that the banks have to have as a part of the Basel. And of course, it all depends on how much commitment we have to net zero emission to allow for all these cushion and reserves that we have within the banking statements or corporate statements. I have to admit that I find from the international landscape, Pakistan pretty behind. Although lately some reports have said we are in the neighborhood of the developing countries, but I'm not as yet comfortable with that statement. So Pakistan will have to deal with, at some point, even if it is in a denial mode, it'll help to deal with stranded assets saga. Because I was in one of the economic advisory groups where we were talking about all these refineries, which are major polluters, and I don't know what we will do, and they're very inefficient and they need to be shut down, was the recommendation of the Energy Task Force within the economic advisory. And that has implication for whatever we are going to be talking about. And now no coal financing policy in Pakistan. Of course, we have had a leadership change, so I don't know what it means eventually. So we take one step and we take two steps backward. It complicates us. But industry, business, and financial intermediaries will have to offer sustainable financing, and they will have to incorporate ESG risk in pricing, risk management, and in capital charge that I talked about. But it all depends on their commitment to net zero emissions. Now, with already Pakistan has a green prudential regulatory regime, which is extremely helpful for what we are going to do, because it recognizes, it gives weightage, aggressive, adverse weightage to the brown finance, and it gives prudential support for green finance and other such measures which are likely to change corporate and finance dynamics as you are working on it eventually. Financing green infrastructure is also a very big area. It, of course, would help enhance resilience and bring in just transition because it will safeguard people and the planet's ecosystem. ESG drivers will work if financial industry and corporate sector are aligned and incentivized through regulatory regime to catalyze ESG action. A coordinated demand and supply push is warranted from standard setters, and accounting bodies are standard setters too. Corporate stakeholders and financial sector will not move until and unless standard setters move from voluntary to compulsory compliance eventually in Pakistan context, because nobody believes when you leave it voluntary. Good news is, of course, that at COP26, Pakistan's companies recognize the virtues of moving to net zero emissions, an important component of the first pillar of ESG, the environment. I say that because we work incredibly hard to get over a dozen companies to commit to net zero emissions at COP26. I'm representing a body called Pakistan Environment Trust Fund, which is working basically to push for a climate change agenda and then carbon pricing and some of these areas, which all will go into all the work that you will be doing. Now, of course, it is important that whatever we do, we deploy resources effectively, and resource efficiency has to be at the center stage of it. which often gets unrecognized because we are looking at the big emissions but not looking at resource efficiency, whether it is energy efficiency. So we have to have matrix for all those other areas too. Now, it has been well recognized, and I think you have to really emphasize that the boards of the companies have a very important role to play, because if you leave it to the management, they would find the easy way out. But of course, since the board includes the shareholders, they are more concerned on the financial returns than non-financial metrics that have financial implications, as has been pointed out. So ESG risk and materiality profile has to be properly organized, recognizing its strength go beyond sustainability. For example, a company can have net zero emissions, zero waste, renewable power facilities, etc. But ESG requires it to go beyond and meets the social obligations, labor, health, and safety standards. We at Karandas have established what is called Infrazamin, which is a credit enhancement organization, private body for infrastructure, and they are actually mainstreaming social obligation, labor, health, and safety standards in the credit enhancement mechanism. So if a Pakistan company comes for credit enhancement for infrastructure, they would have to abide by these standards. So we are holding our partners pretty rigorously to some of this stuff. Conversely, a company might have comprehensive ESG reporting or sustainability reporting backed by even strong governance and welfare framework, but its core manufacturing and business processes and practices would be contributing to emissions and pollution whose adversities risk people and planet. So whether you do it directly or you do it indirectly, it matters. But if you do it collectively, it will be the most powerful force. And I think this has to be recognized in the sustainability stuff. Now, ESG frameworks adopted by companies need to be embedded in SDGs, and that is why I spent in the beginning laying down where we are in the SDG frameworks, what work we are doing as a country. And as you may have guessed, not a lot, frankly. We are behind in terms of the goals, targets, and indicators. But all this is really ammunition for you. If they move on SDGs, then you will have sustainability. Otherwise, if they don't, you don't have sustainability. So complexities, of course, abound as ESG investing space has been mired by what is called in the literature alphabet soup of standards, the GRIs, the TCFD, CDP, etc., which are conveying information on sustainability performance, but neither the reporting nor the assessments can be done in a holistic, coordinated fashion. So let me say that unlike financial disclosures that enjoy a degree of standards conformity, the company's sustainability disclosures do not conform to shared standards, but depend on choices of the firm make for their sustainability assessments. I was speaking on ESG just 2 days back, and every corporate leader said, I'm doing sustainability reporting. And why are you questioning my CSR? Because I said CSR is not ESG. And that offended the corporate leaders because they counted as ESG. So what complicates standardization and comparability are, of course, the proliferation of disclosure frameworks and standards, which are phenomenal in number across the globe. For example, the sustainability reporting requirements, such as mandated by industry standards setters, regulators, or stock exchanges. Now, we will come up with our rules and regulations for reporting standards, and I'll tell you what work we are doing there. And of course, the GRI standards have been at the frontier, and they have spoken pretty aggressively when this body was established. They, of course, are a part of it, but they are saying they are much more ahead of the game than anybody else. But there are 77 industry-specific standards of Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, as I see. While companies apply their own discretion on selecting standards, a rationalization of sustainability reporting standards would help manage assessments, impacts, and respond effectively to sustainability trends such as climate change and issues stemming from resource inefficiency, which is very important in a developing country context. So I have very much welcomed, and I'm very excited about the establishment of ISSB, and I will come back to ICAP again and again to get guidance for the ESG work that we are doing, and you are a part of our task force too. And Farooq, I am indebted to you for partnering with us, and I hope we can exploit you more, because you'll pave the way for the development of not only giving input for the global baseline for sustainability disclosure and meet the needs for investor for comparability and consistency, but you'll help us in Pakistan, the Pakistani companies, to streamline their reporting, incorporating the financial disclosure requirements based from the frontier of IFRS, but then aligning it and providing that comparable information on the sustainability. I just have to technically talk about 3 important points before I share with you ESG Task Force. Few important consideration. I think it's important to keep in mind the work that's going on green taxonomy and prudential regulation and guidelines for sustainable financing instruments to ensure harmonization of standards for better understanding of issuers and investors. All of this is known to the international community, but this work is being led now by the network that I talked about, of the international network of the central bankers, which is being led initially by France, by the governor of the central bank, but now it has virtually 110 plus central banks as their members. So a lot of analytical research work has gone into it, and the IMF is partner to it, and BIS is also. Second point is, how do you really promote digitization of the sustainability data and its requirements, which will be very critical. We also need development of standards that offer cost-effective standards, not just standards, because we are a developing country. So let me conclude and share with you the ESG Task Force. It has launched a few critical meetings, and I've been very inclusive. I've had industry consultation, textile, banking, and we are having in a couple of days automobile industry consultation. KPMG is our pro bono knowledge partner that has supported the ESG Task Force. It's a joint venture between PSX and PICG. No surprise, because I'm chairing the 2 institutions, and they called on me to chair this sustainability and ESG work. And at the task force, we shared the KPMG's global survey of companies that track Pakistan's ESG assessment. Task force has developed a ESG reporting guide to encourage, of course, for us, the listed companies, to report on ESG indicators through listed companies. That will hopefully exercise discernment and diligence in adopting our ESG guide. ESG guide calls for corporates to anchor ESG in corporate strategy and plans and ensure proper recognition of materiality and ESG integration, advocate for effective resource deployment for ESG and assessment of its impact, guide calls for integrating sustainability into risk identification, mitigation, and management in its reinforcement by analyzing use and impact of companies' operation on land, water, biodiversity, ecosystem, backed by assessing their operations, but also assessing the greenhouse gas emissions, and so on and so forth, stuff that you know very well, social and internal and external stakeholders, and of course looking at the quality of governance structure. We advocate investors to evaluate non-financial information as defined by ESG metrics alongside the financial data into investment decisions to ensure sustainable operations and long-term returns, better management of risk. ESG reporting will have to be essential for investors' oversight, seeking performance indicators as well as aiding companies in increasing their operational efficiency, and so on and so forth. ESG task force will, going forward, endeavor to move companies from generalities, which is now what the annual reports contain. They've got beautiful pictures there of the little kids and of energy and the emissions, but less substance. And since everybody is reporting on different guides, so we will count on you to come up with guidance on common and harmonized approaches so that we have manageable disclosures of a set of comparable ESG metrics and indicators tailored for Pakistan's market landscape, its contextual and regulatory requirements, because I can tell you the regulators need your advice too. I've looked at whatever they are doing, we are all behind. The ESG task force will guide alignment of PSX with the recommendations of the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative of the United Nations and the World Federation of Exchanges, like the other 100 stock exchanges have done. We are a late starter. Contextually, this calls for nurturing a business strategy that integrates sustainability into core business of exchange itself and its companies, allocate resources for promoting a culture and action on sustainability and everything else that you know. Corporates listed on stock exchanges in governance will have to have these disclosures, but of course it'll take some time, couple of years, according to my colleagues at stock exchanges, that I'm running faster than the listed companies can move. And we will have to evaluate the ESG metrics and financial services industry to that they are indeed subscribing to the ESG principles or not in their financing. So embracing sustainability and ESG to me is a first step that Pakistan has yet to take in a bigger manner. We are not there as yet. Starting from the legislation to the ministry to coming to the technicalities of it, data will be very crucial. And who's going to invest in the data? There is no data, even of the sustainable goals. We need rigorous planning, capacity building. So our work is cut out, and I am indeed with you all, and I count on your support as we move forward, mainstreaming ESG in the stock exchange and using PICG platform to build capacities. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Dr. Saiba, for sharing very insightful information about the ESG and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. Before we take a short break of prayers, we would like to first give souvenirs to our speakers. And for that purpose, I would like to invite Mr. Farooq Rahman, Chairman of the Accounting Standard Board and the Council member, to please come and present the souvenirs. First, I would like to request Mr. Sohail Malik to please receive a souvenir. Thank you, Sohail. Now, I'd like to request Dr. Shamshad Akhtar to please receive a souvenir. Okay. Thank you, Farooq Saab. We will continue after the short break of 10 minutes, and we have other sessions after the break. Thank you very much. Presentation is by Mr. Sayyid Fahimul Hassan on the IFRS S2. Mr. Fahim is partner in A.F. Ferguson and is ESG leader at A.F. Ferguson as well. Fahim has a vast experience in the field of audit and assurance in Pakistan and abroad as well. By virtue of his keen interest in the professional learning and education, he has remained part of Education and Training Committee and the CPD Committee of ICAP. He's a regular speaker at various forums and a trainer at the Directors Training Program of IBA and ICAP. Please welcome Mr. Fahimul Hassan.
Assalamu alaikum. So the climate is a very interesting subject, but not the standard. So the standard is obviously not as interesting, so I'll try to make it as interactive and interesting possible. So initially, let's just upload the presentation. So initially you have seen the S1, overview of S1. So S2 is pretty much on the same lines. It follows the same pattern, and but obviously it is enhanced. It deals with climate matters. Okay, so the exposure draft incorporates the TCFD recommendations. I'm sure you must be aware as to the task force for climate-related financial disclosure. So this exposure draft incorporates all those recommendations. It includes SASB's climate-related industry-based requirements. It requires disclosure of information about physical risks, transition risks, climate-related opportunities. So it requires information that enables investors to determine the effects of climate-related risks and opportunities on the company's enterprise value. So this is beyond company itself. It is the whole supply chain and the distribution channels. So the enterprise value is being addressed here. not the company's value just within the four walls. So it is beyond that. Understand the company's response to and strategy for managing its climate risks and opportunities. Evaluate the ability of the company to adapt its planning, business model, and operations to climate risks and opportunities. It consistent with the general requirements exposure draft focuses on significant climate risks and opportunities. Information provided must be material for assessment of enterprise value. So as I mentioned, it is consistent with TCFD. So the four pillars: governance, strategy, risk management, cross-industry metrics and targets, and then there is illustrative guidance. And then it builds on SASB standards, which are the US-based standards, industry-based disclosures in Appendix B derived from SASB standards, propose changes to internationalize metrics and add financed emission disclosures. So before we start the standard itself, let's just look at the concepts, a few of the concepts which are very essential to understand the standards. If we don't understand these concepts, we won't be able to understand the standard. So let's see the operations of a company. There are three common tangible inputs: energy, water, material, and it goes into the operations of the company. And the result is the economic benefits, which are in the form of dividends and returns on investments and interest. So we have a whole suite of standards, some voluminous standards running into thousands of pages, dealing with this part, the operations part, and the economic benefit part. So we have very structured standards dealing with whatever is going in, the cost of materials, the cost of operations, and the returns on investments. But unfortunately, our operations have impacts in the form of emissions, effluents, waste. These impacts are on the environment and the impacts on society. So the employees, society, customers, suppliers, other stakeholders. While we account for all these while we account for all these very meticulously, we don't account for the impacts on environment and impacts on the society, employees, customers, and other stakeholders. So what all we need to do is accounting for these impacts. So our operations have impacts, and these impacts have to be accounted for now. So there is a concept of emissions. Now we just looked at the emissions. So our operations result in emissions going back into the environment. So let's look at the emissions. There is a concept of net zero. Net zero means that we have to reverse all our emissions by the year as decided by the year 2050. So by 2050, we have to reverse all our emissions which we have been generating into the environment. So there is an interim target that by 2030 we have to reverse our incremental emissions since 2015. So we have to go back at the level of 2015 by year 2030. And then we have to reduce all the rest of the emissions by the year 2050. So we have to be zero, we have to be carbon neutral by 2050. And this is the concept of net zero. And this is I think, basic foundation of this standard, because it requires you to understand, and then we will see how it. Okay, so on the emissions, what are the emissions? This is very important to understand. There are three types of emissions: scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. If you look at the diagram here below, there are 7 types of gases which are called greenhouse gases. So the greenhouse gases go into the atmosphere, and the classification of scope 1, 2, 3 is that whatever is direct emission coming from company facilities, stationary facilities, and companies' vehicles, that is direct emissions, called scope 1. all the the indirect emissions are the purchased electricity, steam, heating, cooling for own use. So we purchase electricity from KE, WAPDA, whatever emissions they are incurring, we account for our part of those emissions. So that is indirect emissions, scope 2. Scope 3 emissions are indirect emissions. All the rest coming in our supply chain, in our value chain, are called indirect emissions. So starting from purchased goods and services, then capital goods which are produced, then fuel energy use, transport distribution, waste from operations, then our business travels. These are all scope 3. Employee commuting to and from work, this is scope 3. Then leased assets, all scope 3. So this is upstream side, and that is downstream side. So we have our products going into the market, the end of treatment of our products, and then obviously whatever activities are involved. So we have to take into account all the upstream and downstream activities and account for our scope 3 emissions. The SBTi, the Science-Based Targets Initiative, has recommended that if our scope 3 emissions are more than 40% of our scope 1 and 2 emissions, then we must recognize them. We must start monitoring them and measuring them. But if it is less than 40%, then you may wait. But obviously that 40% estimate has to be done accurately. So that was the concept of GHG protocol. Now look at this, this diagram here. There are two sides of the story. One is our impact on the world and the world's impact on us. Now this is very important diagram. So we are polluting environment, and in return, environment is taking revenge from us. So we have our impacts, which are obviously the emissions, the waste, the whatever pollutions, and the world is impacting us. So there are risks, and then there are obviously opportunities. The risks, so let's just look at the impacts. How can we cost efficiently reduce our climate impact in line with the Paris Agreement? So we need to see how can we reduce our impacts, and how, okay, we'll talk about that. Then the risk, how will transition and physical climate risks affect our business, and the opportunities, which new business opportunities can we capture. So this is important to remember. If you have photographic memory, just remember this. This we'll use in later on. The next slide is also important, which is actually the summary of the whole standard. So we have 4 pillars here: the governance, the strategy, the risk management, and metrics and targets. Now metrics and targets can be for many things. So over here. Then we have risk and opportunities. So what kind of risk we have? Transition risk can be out of policy and legal or regulatory, technology risk, technology related risk, and market related risk, and reputation. So these are all transition risks. Then we have physical risk: acute physical risk, chronic physical risk. On the opportunity side, we have resource efficiency opportunities, energy source, product services, market resilience. So in all, we have to manage it. So as a company, while we have governance on the top, we have to make strategies and plans and all the activities to manage these risks and get out of the opportunities, get the best out of opportunities. These risks and opportunities have financial impact. Everything has an impact. It may not have a financial impact today, but later on, maybe in a year's time or 2 years' time, it will translate into financial impact. So the financial impact could be on your P&L, on your balance sheet, and obviously the cash flows. How on P&L? Increasing revenues or decreasing revenues, increasing costs or maybe savings in costs, and then assets may be impaired on liabilities, new liabilities may be imposed. And then capital, you will need and your financing requirements may change. So this is a diagram which you need to remember to understand the whole logic behind the standard. And okay, so Can anyone guess where the metrics and targets would really affect? I mean, where it is more relevant? In the risk side, in the opportunity side, in the financial impact side. The metrics and targets are really relevant. Which area? Because I have not attached these to anyone. Risk? Whoever said risk? No risk. Opportunities? Where? Opportunity. So, primarily the resource efficiency and energy cost. These are the two areas where you need to reduce emissions. So you be more efficient in your resource utilization and your energy usage. Those are the two primary areas where you need your metrics and targets. But there would be obviously all the areas where you would need some metrics and targets, right? Not working. Okay. So the roadmap towards sustainability reporting starts with engaging your stakeholders, identifying the key topics, preparing strategy, incorporate into this management, integrate in your business processes, monitoring performance, sustainability reporting. So what we are discussing now is the end result, the culmination of all these activities. And governance is on the top. Governance remains here throughout the cycle. So you cannot issue a report IFRS standard S1 unless you have run the whole cycle. And if you do all the 4 pillars, the governance, strategy, risk management, and risk target. So it is basically the storytelling. At the end of the year, you will be telling your shareholders, investors, what actually you have done throughout the year in this area. So if you not run the whole cycle, I'm afraid you won't be able to issue a report. Okay, so the theme of the standard. There are 4 pillars as we discussed earlier. The standard encompasses the enterprise value, so it is beyond the enterprise itself. It is the whole value chain. They're disclosures only, so there are no recommendations or anything, or treatments or accounting side of it. It is all disclosures only standard. Majorly descriptive, so throughout the standard you will find a lot of descriptive things to be given in your reports. And obviously there are quantitative areas also, but majorly it is descriptive. Inquiring tone, so throughout the standard it asks you to tell us how you have done this, how you have achieved this target, how you have, how your strategy was formed, how your risk management is being done. So it is the how tone throughout the standard. Process and control oriented, and it only asks about processes and control. तो ये नहीं पूछ रहा कि जी आपने रिजल्ट्स अचीव कर लिए कि नहीं कर लिए, ये पूछ रहे हैं कि क्या आप इस एरिया में किस तरह काम कर रहे हैं और क्या प्रोसेस इंप्लीमेंट कर रहे हैं. रिजल्ट्स नॉट बॉदर्ड, अभी आपके रिजल्ट्स बताने की जिम्मेदारी नहीं. So the process has to be reported throughout the standard. It talks about processes and controls. Tell your story. No one size fits all. ये कोई स्टैंडर्ड नहीं है कि हाँ आप एक उठाएं एक अकाउंटिंग ट्रीटमेंट सब पे लगा दें, ये वो नहीं है. ये हर आदमी अपनी स्टोरी खुद बताएगा. Higher focus on governance strategy. There is a lot more focus on governance and strategy. Strategy का by the way सबसे बड़ा एरिया है. 60% of the standard revolves around strategy. Quantitative disclosures, metrics and targets के अंदर हम quantitative की बात करेंगे. If we are allowed alternatives, qualitative disclosures will be अगर quantitative नहीं दे रहे हैं तो qualitative देंगे और फिर उसके रिजल्ट देंगे. Cross industry comparable metrics, this is very good and important development. Cross industry आपकी comparable metrics आप issue कर रहे होंगे तो फिर दूसरे लोगों से आप compare कर सकते हैं कि आपकी किधर performance है. So this with all this background, let's just begin the standard itself. The key features: transition planning, emission targets and use of carbon offsets, climate resilience of business strategy in multiple scenarios, then scope 1 to 3 emissions, requirement to disclose GHG emissions. So let's talk about governance. The objective of climate-related financial disclosure and governance is to enable users of general-purpose financial reporting to understand the governance processes, controls, procedures used to monitor and manage climate risk and opportunities. Entities shall disclose. इसमें क्या disclose करना है? Identity of the body. आपकी कौन सी body है जो कि oversight कर रही है? So body could be your board, could be a committee, could be an individual. So you need to report that. You need to disclose it. Responsibilities reflected in TOR. उसका जो TOR है उसमें क्या responsibilities reflect हुई हैं? Board mandate में है या other related policies के अंदर है, जो भी है आप report करें. Then skills and competencies, whether the board has or the committee has the required skills and competencies to assess the risks and opportunities and all the related things. Then process and frequency of reporting to the body. तो body को कब क्या reporting होती है, उसका पूरा process आप report करें. Climate risk part of corporate strategy, decisions on major transactions and risk management policies. तो अब आपका climate risk जो है वो कॉर्पोरेट स्ट्रैटेजी का भी पार्ट होना जरूरी है, वो भी आपको बताना है. डिसीजन ऑन मेजर ट्रांजैक्शंस हैं तो उस पर भी आपने रिपोर्ट करना है कि क्लाइमेट रिस्क को आपने कैसे हैंडल किया है. एंड रिस्क मैनेजमेंट पॉलिसीज में भी उसका पार्ट होना जरूरी है. टारगेट सेटिंग, मॉनिटरिंग, परफॉर्मेंस इंक्लूडिंग रिम्यूनरेशन लिंकेजेस. ये पूरा प्रोसेस आपको बताना है कि हाउ डू यू डू दैट. एज आई सेड कि हाउ वी डोंट नो हाउ इज द टारगेट सेटिंग द टारगेट, हाउ इज मॉनिटरिंग परफॉर्मेंस एंड रिम्यूनरेशन पे कोई लिंक अगर आपने दिया है तो वो बताना जरूरी है कि आपकी जो मैनेजमेंट है उसका रिम्यूनरेशन लिंक है इस क्लाइमेट रिस्क को मैनेज करने से रिलेटेड, उसकी मैट्रिक्स को अचीव करने से रिलेटेड. एंड देन मैनेजमेंट रोल क्या है इस पूरे एरिया में, वो भी आपको डिस्क्लोज कर रहे हैं. The next one being strategy. The objective of climate-related financial disclosures and strategies to enable users of general-purpose reporting to understand an entity's strategy for addressing significant climate risks and opportunities. इसके अंदर 4 areas हैं: climate-related risk opportunities, strategy and decision making, financial position, financial performance, cash flows, climate resilience, scenario analysis. Okay. How climate change could reasonably be expected to affect an entity's business model, strategy, cash flows, their access to finance, and their cost of capital over the short, medium, and long term. This has to be disclosed. Climate-related risks, physical risks, can be of two types: acute, chronic. Acute, event-driven, where the floods, cyclones, hurricanes. Chronic, longer-term shifts, sea level rise, chronic heat waves, and similar other things. Transition risk is the risk arising out of policy change, regulatory change, legal change, or technological changes, reputational risk you are running, and then market change. The consumer behaviors are shifting, so you need to, that falls into transition risk. You need to develop more products which are greener and which are. And then climate-related opportunities. Use of industry topics and related industry metrics. So where you are in that industry, there is guidance available that these are the topics related to that industry. Focus on those targets. So now you can actually narrow down. You don't need to just look around. There are relevant topics given, so you just pick them and start addressing them. In this strategy, current and anticipated effects of significant climate-related risk and opportunities on an entity's business model. So you need to explain कि business model के ऊपर क्या current या आगे changes आनी है. Specifically, a description of current anticipated effects of significant climate risks and opportunities on an entity's value chain. तो जो पूरी entire value chain के ऊपर जो impacts आने हैं वो आपने बताने, आज के भी और future के anticipated. Where in its value chain significant climate risks and opportunities are concentrated. तो concentration का भी बताना है ताकि आपको पता चले कि आपका risk ज़्यादा किधर है. So it could be geographic areas, infrastructure, distribution channels, whatever. Strategy के अंदर strategy decision making. The effects of significant climate risks and opportunities on its strategy and decision making, including its transition plans. तो आपके जो transition plans बन रहे हैं to lower carbon economy, वो आपने इसमें अपने एड्रेस करने हैं. How the entity plans to achieve any climate related targets, current and anticipated changes to the entity's business model to manage carbon energy and water intensive operations. तो अगर हमारे carbon energy operations हैं, coal use करें for example या water intensive operations हैं, उसके ऊपर हमारी क्या approach है, उसको हम कैसे reduce करेंगे अपना dependence और उसके alternate technologies में कैसे invest करें या how to reduce that risk. And decommissioning asset, तो जो हमारे पुराने assets हैं उन्हें decommission करना है. Direct and indirect adaptation and mitigation, तो direct adaptation ये है कि हम खुद अपनी behaviors change करेंगे, अपनी practices change करेंगे, technologies change करेंगे. और indirect ये है कि हमारे जो suppliers हैं, हमारे जो employees हैं, consumers हैं, उनके साथ काम करेंगे और उनको नई behavior पे लाएंगे. How these plans will be resourced, इनकी funding कहाँ से होगी, that you have to report also. Information regarding climate related targets for these plans, the processes in place for review of the target, the amount of the entity's emission target to be achieved through emission reduction within the entity's value chain, and the intended use of carbon offsets in achieve. तो दो तरीके से आप कर सकते हैं, या तो emission reduction कर सकते हैं, अपने जो भी emission को आप reduce करेंगे through natural way में, या आप टेक्नोलॉजी यूज करेंगे. और दूसरा तरीका ये है कि जो emissions आप बिल्कुल से आप कुछ emissions हैं जो कि reduce कर सकते हैं, but कुछ हैं जो कि imminent है, जो कि कभी reduce नहीं होंगी. उसके लिए फिर आप carbon offsets लेंगे. Carbon offsets के through आप उसको net करेंगे. Quantitative and qualitative information about the progress of plans disclosed in prior reporting. This is important कि जो पिछले सालों में आपने plan बताए थे, उनके आज क्या emission है, उसके बारे में आप quantitative data की share करेंगे और qualitative data की बताएंगे कि उस progress में अगर आप behind हैं तो क्यों हैं. Okay. This one is not working. So information regarding climate related targets. So we are talking about carbon offsets. So the requirement is that intended use of carbon offset in achieving emission targets. In explaining the intended use of carbon offset, the entity shall disclose the extent to which the targets rely on the use of carbon offsets, whether the offsets will be subject to a third-party offset verification or certification scheme, and if so, which scheme, the type of carbon offsets, are these nature-based or based on technological removals, carbon removals, and whether the amount intended to be achieved is through carbon removal or emission avoidance, any other significant factor. So these have to be reported on carbon offsets. On the financial position, financial performance and cash flows, the effects of significant climate risks and opportunities on the entity's financial position, that is balance sheet, performance, P&L, and cash flows for the reporting period, and the anticipated effects over the short, medium, and long term, including how these risks are included in the financial planning. So how significant climate risks and opportunities have affected the entity's most recently reported financial position, performance, and cash flow. तो जो पिछला साल गुजरा है, उसके अंदर अगर कोई उसके बाद कोई डेवलपमेंट हुई है जिससे कोई अफेक्ट आया है, तो that we have to report. Then risk and opportunities are expected to result in material adjustment in assets and liabilities values reported in the next year's financial. तो जो next year में अगर हम जो रिपोर्ट करने जा रहे हैं उसमें कोई material adjustment हमको नजर आ रही है तो वो भी हमको रिपोर्ट करनी है अभी. How the entity expects its financial position to change. तो balance sheet में क्या change आएगी over time given a strategy to address significant climate risk opportunities including planned sources of funding, and how the entity expects financial performance to change. तो P&L में जो changes आएंगी over time given a strategy to address significant climate. तो जो हमने बिल्कुल पहली शुरू की 2 स्लाइड्स अगर आपको याद हो तो उसमें हमने एंड पे कहा था कि जी आपके इम्पैक्ट जो होंगे वो इधर रेवेन्यूज बढ़ जाएंगे या कम हो जाएंगे, कॉस्ट में चेंजेस आएंगी, इसी तरह से एसेट लायबिलिटीज में आएंगी, तो ये आपको डिस्क्लोज करने हैं. इफ द एंटिटी इज अनएबल टू डिस्क्लोज क्वांटिटेटिव इंफॉर्मेशन फॉर द अबव, an explanation of why that is the case. And when providing quantitative information, an entity can disclose single amounts or a range. Okay, one important aspect, as I said, strategy is very important in this standard, is the resilience of our strategy. So, in the changing climate scenarios, whether our strategy will hold the ground, or will it need to be changed. So, the resilience have to be tested. To disclose information to enable users to understand the resilience of the entity's strategy to climate related changes, developments, or uncertainties, taking into consideration entities identified significant climate risk opportunities and related uncertainties. The entity shall use climate related scenario analysis to assess its climate resilience unless it is unable to do so. If unable to do so, तो उस केस में फिर ऑल्टरनेटिव मेथड आपने क्या यूज़ किया है, क्या टेक्निक यूज़ की है, वो बताना है. An entity analysis of climate resilience must enable users to understand the implications, if any, for its strategy, the significant areas of uncertainty covered in the analysis, the entity's capacity to adjust or adapt its strategy and business model over the short, medium, long term to climate developments in terms of availability and flexibility to redeploy capital, redeploy, upgrade or decommission assets, and the effect of current or planned investments. तो जो आपकी तमाम बैलेंस शीट और पीएनएल है, उसकी अगर शक्ल चेंज होने जा रही है, तो उसमें क्या आप इस काबिल होंगे कि नए सिनेरियो में स्टैंड कर सकें, उसको आप विद स्टैंड कर सकें. तो ये आपको रेजिलियंस टेस्टिंग के थ्रू पता चलेगा, सिनेरियो एनालिसिस के थ्रू पता चलेगा. तो दो ऑब्वियसली हैं कि अगर आप सिनेरियो एनालिसिस कर पा रहे हैं तो आपको ये सारे डिस्क्लोजर देने, और अगर आपने कोई अल्टरनेट मेथड यूज किया है तो आपको वो उस साइट पे जो डिस्क्लोजर्स हैं वो देने हैं. और आखिर के 3 कॉमन है. तो विच सिनेरियोज वर यूज्ड एंड देयर सोर्सेज, whether the analysis compared a diverse range of climate related scenarios, whether the scenarios are associated with transition risk or increased physical risk. कौन से risk पे आपने scenario build किए हैं वो आप बताएं. Whether the entity has used a scenario aligned with the latest international agreement on climate change, why the chosen scenarios are relevant to the assessment, and then time horizon used in the analysis. तो अगले 10 साल, 20 साल, 50 साल वो आपको बताने. Inputs used in the analysis, the scope of operations covered, and then assumptions about the way the transition to a lower carbon economy will affect the entity. On that side, आपको देना है कि explanation of the methods or techniques used, maybe it could be sensitivity analysis, stress testing, or something else. Climate-related assumptions used, including whether those include a range of hypothetical outcomes, and then why the chosen climate-related assumptions are relevant to assessing climate risk. So ये सारे disclosures हमें देने हैं. अच्छा, ये एक इस जस्ट एन इलस्ट्रेशन के जिधर ट्रांजिशन रिस्क एंड अपॉर्चुनिटीज के अंदर आपका पॉलिसी रिस्क 15 साल के ऊपर आपकी जो कॉस्ट प्रोजेक्टेड कॉस्ट होगी वो आप देख रहे हैं. 1.5 डिग्री सेल्सियस सिनेरियो में, 2 डिग्री सेल्सियस में, 3 डिग्री सेल्सियस में, या आपके अपने एनडीसीज हैं आपने उसके ऊपर बना रहे हैं. तो दीज कैन बी द सिनेरियोज बिल्ड. इसी तरह टेक्नोलॉजी के अंदर नेक्स्ट 15 ईयर्स के अंदर नई टेक्नोलॉजी में अगर आप जा रहे हैं, ग्रीन रेवेन्यूज आपके जनरेट हो रहे हैं, देयर ऑब्वियसली अपॉर्चुनिटीज, तो वो इन सिनेरियोज में कितने उसका इम्पैक्ट्स आप पे क्रिएट हो रहे हैं. इसी तरह फिजिकल रिस्क एंड अपॉर्चुनिटीज के अंदर एक्यूट फिजिकल क्या क्या हो सकता है वो आप असेस करें और वो टेस्ट करें कि आप रेजिलिएंट हैं या नहीं है. उसमें एक्सट्रीम वेदर में एक्सट्रीम हीट एंड कोल्ड वेव्स, precipitation and snowfall, wind gusts, tropical cyclones, and then chronic के अंदर coastal flooding, fluvial flooding and wildfires, जो कि बड़ा कॉमन सा हो गया. तो ये आपको अगले, अगर आप 15 साल पे कर रहे हैं या अगर आप अगले 20 साल 30 साल पे कर रहे हैं, तो वो कंसिस्टेंटली आपको पूरे सिनेरियोज बिल्ड करने और उनके इम्पैक्ट्स को असेस करना है. Okay, let's talk about risk management, the third pillar. The objective of climate-related financial disclosures on risk management is to enable users of general purpose financial reporting to understand the process or processes by which climate risks and opportunities are identified, assessed, and managed. Okay, when disclosing information about the process or processes by which climate risks and opportunities are identified, assessed, managed, the entity shall disclose how it assesses the likelihood and effects associated with such risks, such as the qualitative factors, quantitative threshold, and other criteria used, and how it prioritizes climate risks relative to other types of risks, including its use of risk assessment tools, फॉर एग्जांपल साइंस बेस्ड रिस्क असेसमेंट टूल्स। तो ये जो दो हैं पहले, ये हमारे मटेरियलिटी के अंदर कवर होते हैं। जो नॉर्मली हम मटेरियलिटी असेसमेंट कर रहे होते हैं उसमें ये दो चीज़ें हम देख रहे होते हैं, ये हमें रिपोर्ट करना है। The input parameters it uses, for example, data sources, the scope of operations covered, and the detail used in the assumptions, and whether it has changed the processes used compared to the prior reporting period. ये भी बताना है कि अगर हमने risk management में कोई changes किए हैं पिछले साल से। अच्छा, opportunity side के ऊपर the process it used to identify, assess, and prioritize the opportunities, and then again monitor and manage. How do we do that? The risk, including related policies, the opportunities, including related policies. The extent to which and how the climate risk identification, assessment, and management processes are integrated into the overall risk management process. And then the extent to which and how the climate-related opportunity identification, assessment, and management process or processes are integrated into the overall मैनेजमेंट प्रोसेसेस। तो ये दोनों इंटीग्रेशन जो होनी है इसको भी आपने रिपोर्ट करना है। अच्छा, दिस इज ऑब्वियसली जस्ट एन इलस्ट्रेशन। ट्रांजेक्शन रिस्क जो हैं वो आपके ये चार हमने पहले भी देखे हैं, वही हैं। फिजिकल रिस्क, एक्यूट फिजिकल, क्रॉनिक फिजिकल, और अपॉर्चुनिटीज, रिसोर्स एफिशिएंसी, कैन बी यूज ऑफ मोर एफिशिएंट मोड्स ऑफ ट्रांसपोर्ट, एफिशिएंट बिल्डिंग्स, रिड्यूस वाटर यूजेज, यूज ऑफ रिसाइकलिंग, एनर्जी यूजेज, रिसोर्स, इसके अंदर भी आप लोअर का एमिशन के ऊपर शिफ्ट कर रहे हैं। इसी तरह प्रोडक्ट सर्विसेज के अंदर नई प्रोडक्ट्स में R&D हो रहा है और इनोवेशन हो रही है, वो आप इसमें देख रहे हैं। और मार्केट अपॉर्चुनिटी, एक्सप्लोरिंग न्यू मार्केट्स और टाइप्स ऑफ एसेट्स इन ऑर्डर टू डाइवर्सिफाई एक्टिविटीज। अच्छा जी, लास्ट वन इज metrics and targets. The objective of climate-related financial disclosures or metrics and targets is to enable users of general purpose reporting to understand how an entity measures, monitors, and manages its significant climate risks and opportunities. These disclosures shall enable users to understand how the entity assesses its performance, including progress towards the targets it has set. इसमें जो क्रॉस इंडस्ट्री मेट्रिक कैटेगरीज दी हुई हैं उसके अंदर ग्रीन हाउस गैस एमिशंस के ऊपर मैट्रिक्स एंड टारगेट्स मैट्रिक्स बतानी ज़रूरी हैं। हम किस तरह से उसमें रिडक्शन करने जा रहे हैं। ट्रांजेक्शन रिस्क के ऊपर, इसी तरह फिजिकल रिस्क पे अमाउंट एंड परसेंटेज ऑफ आवर एसेट्स एक्सपोज टू द ट्रांजेक्शन रिस्क एंड एक्सपोज टू फिजिकल रिस्क एंड अपॉर्चुनिटीज़। देन कैपिटल डिप्लॉयमेंट, कितनी हमें फंडिंग की ज़रूरत पड़नी है, उसके मैट्रिक्स हमने अब बनाने। और इंटरनल कार्बन प्राइसेस, जो अगर कंपनी ने अपनी कोई इंटरनल कार्बन प्राइसिंग सेट की है तो वो डिस्क्लोज करनी है। और रेम्यूनरेशन, वेदर इट इज़ लिंक्ड विद द सो जो भी रेम्यूनरेशन रिलेटेड KPIs हैं वो डिस्क्लोज होने हैं। Industry-based requirements in preparing these disclosures, and entities shall consider whether industry-based metrics associated with disclosure topics could be used in whole or part of the to meet the requirements. तो क्रॉस इंडस्ट्री मेट्रिक कैटेगरीज दी हुई हैं, वो हर जगह लगेंगी। और फिर स्पेसिफिक टू इंडस्ट्री मेट्रिक्स हैं, वो आप अपने हिसाब से देख लेंगे। अच्छा, हम एक दो स्लाइड्स के अंदर जो इसकी ग्रीन हाउस गैस एमिशंस हैं उसको डिस्कस कर लेते हैं। And I think that would be the last slide. Yes. So greenhouse gas emissions, उससे related जो disclosures हैं वो हैं, उसके बाद हम targets देख लेते हैं। Absolute gross scope 1 to 3 emissions and emission intensity for each scope. तो हमें gross emissions बतानी है, net नहीं बतानी है कि हमने actual ये की थी but आपस में हमने net भी कर दी तो net पे आ गए। No. Gross emissions होंगी 1, 2, 3, all three. And emission intensity for each scope. Emission in तो absolute is like मैंने इतने metric ton की emissions करी है, और intensity means कि उसको मैं अगर per product पे लेके चला जाऊँ तो मैंने हर product पे इतने metric tons की emissions करी है, तो वो intensity बन जाती है। For scope 1 and 2 emission disclose, जो हमने disclose किए हैं, disclose emissions separately for the consolidated accounting group। तो जिधर हम consolidation कर रहे हैं उस पूरे group की एक साथ report होंगी, और जो अनकंसोलिडेटेड सब्सिडीज हैं या एसोसिएट JVs हैं उनकी हम अलग से रिपोर्ट करेंगे। द अप्रोच यूज टू इंक्लूड एमिशंस फॉर द कौन सी अप्रोच हम यूज करें? एंटिटीज इंक्लूड्स एज एसोसिएट, जो एसोसिएट और जो नॉन कंसोलिडेटेड सब्सिडीज और दूसरी हैं उसमें हमने कौन सी अप्रोच यूज़ की है? 2 अप्रोचेज हैं, इक्विटी शेयर मेथड है या ऑपरेशनल कंट्रोल मेथड इन द GHG प्रोटोकॉल। तो वो हम अप्रोच बताएंगे कि हम कौन सी फॉलो कर रहे हैं। The reason for the choice of approach and how that relates to the disclosure objective for metrics and targets, ये भी बताना है कि हमने क्यों ये अप्रोच फॉलो की है। स्कोप 3 के लिए, फॉर स्कोप 3 emission disclose entity shall include upstream and downstream emissions। तो आपने जो शुरू में हमने एक स्लाइड पे देखा था कि अपस्ट्रीम emissions स्कोप 3 में आती हैं, फिर इसी तरह डाउनस्ट्रीम, तो वो सारी आपने इंक्लूड करनी है। The categories included to enable users to understand which scope 3 emissions are included or excluded। तो अगर आपने कहीं scope out की हुई है अपनी scope 3 को, तो वो आपने बताना है, categories बना के आप बता सकते हैं। When the entities measure of scope 3 emissions includes information provided by entities in its value chain, it shall explain the basis for that measurement। ऑब्वियसली स्कोप 3 एमिशंस को मेजर करना इज़ नॉट दैट सिंपल, तो उसके लिए आपको मेजरमेंट टेक्निक्स यूज़ करनी पड़ती हैं, वो आपने बतानी है। इफ द एंटिटी एक्सक्लूड्स दोज GHG emissions, it shall state the reason for omitting them। ठीक है, तो ये measured in accordance with the GHG protocol for corporate standards। ये GHG emissions हो गया। अच्छा, लास्टली टारगेट्स है, तो टारगेट से रिलेटेड जो डिस्क्लोजर देने हैं, metrics used to assess progress towards reaching the target and achieving its strategic goals। तो जो metrics हम उस target के लिए use कर रहे हैं, हमने वो देनी है, is the KPI basically। This specific target the entity has set for addressing climate risks and opportunities, whether this target is an absolute target or an intensity target, the objective of the target, for example, mitigation, adaptation, or conformance with sector or science-based initiatives, how the target compares with those created in the latest international agreement on climate change, and whether it has been validated by a third party, whether the target was derived using a sectoral decarbonization approach। तो अगर एक पूरा सेक्टर decarbonize होने जा रहा है, तो जो आपकी इंडिविजुअल कंपनी के टारगेट्स हैं वो वहीं से डिराइव होंगे। आप ये नहीं कह सकते कि आप अपने टारगेट्स कुछ और बना दें जबकि आपके सेक्टर के कुछ और हों। The period over which the target applies, the base period from which progress is measured, and any milestones on interim stages or interim targets। So I think this is it। We can address the questions if in the Q&A session। Okay।
Thank you, Fahim, for a wonderful presentation. I will request Osama Rashid to give the souvenir to Fahim before we move further. Okay, we have like 2 more sessions, but the first one is we have like we are joined by 2 international speakers, and then we have a panel discussion for the local representatives over here. So our first international guest speaker is Mr. Tim Kasim. Tim is an International Sustainability Standard Board technical staff at the IFRS Foundation. He's part of the technical team developing the ISB's inaugural draft IFRS disclosure standard. Tim has an MSc in Accounting, Organization and Society from London School of Economics and Political Science and DPhil in Management Studies from Said Business School, University of Oxford. So he will be joining us and will be answering any of your questions, and Sohail Malik will be moderating this particular session. Okay, Arslan Khalid will be doing the moderation of this session.
first of all, Mr. Tim Qasim and also Michael Zanoi for joining us today. This is the first seminar that we are doing in Pakistan on the sustainability reporting standards. So I think from that point of view, I think the team here is quite excited to the discussion that we are looking in the coming months also on how the sustainability reporting will be envisaged in the Pakistan context. We have lots of people in the room, and we have taken technical presentations on the two standards that the ISSB has issued and the exposure drafts. And although I think these are complex standards with many of the terms and requirements that are new to us as a profession, but at the same time, we are quite hopeful that we are, in a learning process as others, and over the course of time, we will be more familiar with the requirements and how those should be implemented. But certainly, I think we are looking forward to more implementation guidance and illustrative approach on how the standards would be, how the disclosures would be laid out across different industries, because each industry may have their own particular issues and circumstances. So we're not aware how much it is in the work plan of the ISSB to develop illustrations and examples on different climate and other ESG topics for more of an educative interest, and because we believe as a profession that we have to move from the traditional corporate balance sheet reporting to the more broader economic reporting. So I think that's those kind of educative material will be helpful, and we look forward to that. But I will now request the House and people around to raise any of the questions or comments that they have. It's a good opportunity to interact directly with the people who are making the standard and share experiences. Sohail has, I think.
Hi, Tim. Hi, Michael. Thank you for joining. I have a question around materiality. And can you please explain that how materiality under sustainability standards would interact with the materiality that's normally we see in the financial reporting? So if it would be helpful that how users as well as preparers would be looking at this aspect. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. We're really excited to learn about science, and thanks for the presentation earlier. It is almost area, and there is a lot to cover at the time, so it's important to also bring this as around line standards are being used. And it's really to address the investors to understand what are the potential risks and opportunities of the business with the current people who have and really standards address this based on as a business what are the risks that you might be exposed to in ways to management. How do you communicate these to your investors and then extra funding to make the so the materiality determination of these plans in macro that we've been asking you is thinking inspired very much by the intelligence that you know from financial accounting as well. It is that investment focus, what is information about the business is important to your current financial investment. Would you like to come in? They showed up the next month for that discussion. And also, equally reliable
Okay, thank you. There's another question from Usman.
So basically, we have seen that what happens is that normally management is spending more time in reporting actually than really doing what they have to actually report for. So while I was seeing different presentations here, I could just realize that all of this is quite cumbersome. This might take a lot of time, and although the importance of sustainability cannot be denied at all, but it should not be like this that the management ends up spending more time on reporting rather than working on sustainability itself. So how to address this challenge?
Excellent question. Thank you for that. This is very important. And standards are really there to provide management support and the company to report on what they are doing. That's important to different spending. And the majority threshold that we did look at is actually the key element of this. The presentation was quite a lot of detail of standards, and there are a lot of methods and requirements that we need to be recorded. Have some of the really units trying to put it out and then go to another part. But the reality is that it is up to the business to determine what is material information for their investors to know. And this really makes this a lot more the way that the science themselves are the pillars of the PCI capital so that was mentioned earlier, really focus on the business and the company categories. Is look at the governance. What is the governance process? And what is the systematic risk opportunities they are and what are the actual tools to design, identify, and help with it. So, when you look at the standards, each of this is many disclosures, and it is up to you as the accountant to provide the business on which of those disclosures will be zero in each of the business case.
If I can add that, so and also, kind of what information, and if you are doing anything, let's say that if you get data, actually you don't have to process of this. And by the way, this is what we are doing in the future in order to address the issue. So it's really meant to be competent, certainly not try to situation to restrict the role of management or role of management. And instead, I think what we want to get out of this is to management with interact with their audience, to provide more insight to what is management like. And that is important for practice. I think the other thing that I would have said as well would be we'll be quite keen to get to see what which aspects of the to make our more difficult. We should want more detail to have this in your particular context. Because that area that we are going to think very hard on, the area, and it would be one, because it is a focus and actually, so all of these are right, and I mean, an important area for us is how identify which area you think requires a bit more information, have three or other methods that would be provided to the key of those process.
Up till now, we have been more of reporting historical information. Under IFRS S1 and IFRS S2, we will be reporting more about the risks and opportunities sustainability related risks and opportunities, and those information for example, the measures that will be taken by the company in order to mitigate those risks or to capitalize those opportunities. So my question is, most of the companies will be reluctant to disclose those information because if such information is disclosed, so it will be having a lot of impact on the competition. Other competitors will be knowing those information and vendors will be knowing those information if future information is being disclosed. And my second question is connected with the first question is, how will regulators and the auditors will be ensuring the completeness of those information, whether it is completely disclosed or not?
You can go first, huh?
I have a little bit. I think that's the question with forward information and you are for information for the short, medium, and long term. That is forward element of that element of ownership activity. And ultimately, you feel confident that would be not equal for everybody. Within the technical requirement portion of itself, there is a provision with aggregation and aggregation with especially that we want information, but you aggregate it in such a way that it would provide direct information to use it, but having by voice too much. We're not asking you what more professional obligation going to your particular department, but we're asking for overall view that helps professionals understand your business or the activity that your business or the affiliate will also that is more likely that it will be interested in I think with regard to assurance, that is an area that we are thinking about, obviously with the methods and others, the quantitative information that I think is perhaps more competency. And with quantitative information, that's an area that I think we think about. And as part of that, what we're doing well is feeding the national auditing side factors, auditing IFI and that's ongoing procedure you have any further use for that?
In terms of that, the conversation is very important. This is about how the investments find the right investments and how to find the risk of this sector. Another is about making sure that the long-term investments support the business transition away from the risk of all the risk of right. The other point I would also ask is that methods, in my view, the more important element of the process is how robust is the risk management process, how robust is the business in identifying it and making sure that you are successful managing it. And if you focus on the risk management, that means it goes the risk and goes what you're doing. This actually sets you apart from your competitors and sets you up to be very robust investment option. And I think many investors will know exactly what they're investing very well. They know their investments and they will be able to get aware of what they will be looking for. In my opinion, are businesses who are aware of the investments.
Considering that these standards are targeted for investors, So why we are attaching it with general purpose financial reporting? I mean, if it's targeted with if it's targeted for lenders and investor only, what if we keep it separate, considering the previous question that our disclosing a lot of information that's asked in these standards will be available to our competitors as well. So considering if we keep it as a separate financial separate set of disclosure, will it be more helpful?
Yes, go ahead.
I think some more technical I'm going about. But really, these two are more relevant of characters, other things, these go for. And so looking at it together is important. But also looking at many opportunities are also there. One interesting use of you mentioned the other is so Madagascar is looking at what is the business plan and the activity of the business in the narrative of the report. And then they come back to the financial and the other R&D. And so whether they're actually running the kind of they're saying that they're innovating and looking at new ways to do things or only in there, you have to actually that aspect. So these are interesting issues.
You know, maybe I had more that really what I had mentioned. A lot of activity with financial data is reported. And in fact, the IFD, National Financial Report, has also added a few ESG projects that were included during the finance this. On the financial data, it makes sense to actually have sustainability, which is individual each has the financial data. If you were to look at activity to understand how it is affecting financial engagement right now, already, and who also look at how it affects financial engagement in the short, medium, or long term. And again, we're not asking for detailed information that would be any commercial issues, but we're looking for direct information. And in both reading what we said is that one of them is allowing for what information required either at the or at the range. That's kind of the flavor that allows direct information that would enable that activity to be a good solution as the financial.
I just wanted to know that what is the scope of these both standards, S1 and S2? Are they applicable to all type of industries like manufacturing, trading, and equally to the financial industries? If yes, if these are applicable to financial industries, then how they would be accounting, reporting to carbon emissions, because these industries are not directly engaged in such type of activities. Thank you.
you have
Yes. Um, my question actually is that sustainability reporting, as we know, as we all know, is very important and essential. But how is sustainability reporting going to apply to certain industries and sectors and certain companies which have very low carbon footprint? For example, an IT solutions company or a small manufacturing company or maybe say a mutual fund. I mean, how are these basically sustainability reporting apply to those sort of sectors and companies?
Very much. The reason is, if you don't have as much as you have in your job. So it's not about making every side really making sure it's still happening. So one of the key considerations of sanitary focus is to make sure it's an undue burden on it. We said that there are in certain sectors, there are tensions further removed from the issues society not having. So we mentioned tax risk is around the investments of the business, or if you're financial institutions, that's really being high. But if kind of a business if there's any risk in that, that's great. There usually is some. The important part is to make sure that those regulations come down on the look at the supply chain. And so the investment can see that rigorous assessment of the risk and opportunities and I think this system might be already and so perhaps maybe people from the other how you can help create low carbon solutions. Unfortunately, we're not there with it, but there is lower emissions, for example, and through IT. So there are opportunities that I think you actually have a better investment some other.
okay. So we have just one last question from Nazis.
So I'd just like to ask two questions. One is related to materiality. You did mention it in the beginning, but the concept of double materiality as it is coming up in the EU legislation, how does that come into the ISSB? And the other question is related to KPIs. I know we've looked at the TCFD in detail and how it's going to be linked, but what about the other KPIs that are covered in the GRI, and how will the ISSB standard improve comparability in that?
Maybe I can start with the first question about the legality. I think it's really important to talk about stories that with different jurisdictions or the initiatives that we went to CLI, that they're not necessarily solely trying to purpose of effect. CLI wants to be more efficient, and the group is also developing CSP, but they are trying for further purposes, different ways of efficient one. So the CSR the standard is defined with involved ingredients, to fulfill that ambitious climate target. So I think the materiality which that we take would be quite that for us, the materiality means that information, community communication, immediately the European policy. So that has been more than strong way. So I think that get it. To me, direct line is how I'm going to fight. So after that, we generalize API. We generalize. We always use only generalize and put things like metric. We want to make sure that if the competitors are already doing political and GRI, that we're not posting any further that. And likewise, we start with ISSP and then we look at okay, I might not start further. So having that overall kind of really important and every time you find MOU with work and contribution to show that we better
Okay.
The way I see it is eventually all the stuff information that might be required until we have the move to the party. So our goal is to get that stuff information in a way that is very useful and productive. But I think there's one up to using the document and then to get about a broader more information. So the way we see it is similar to the building block. Global baseline of sustainability with standards and hopefully globally and another where businesses or economic from they're getting the same information consistently and they're unable to do something they have somebody. But on top of that, the jurisdictions and more physical they add on additional building costs and therefore provide something to that level. The one I said also the funding compensation additionality is still
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Tim and Michael, for taking your time, I think, for extensive discussions with us. And it's a pleasure. And we look forward to more and more sessions on this topic in the coming months before the standard finally take its shape. And we look forward to also your time as we move forward in this journey. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, and I wish you good
Same here. Thank you.
Okay, in the last we have one panel discussion, and Arslan Khalid will be moderating the session, and I would like to invite the first panelist, Sayyid Fahimul Hassan Saab. Our second panelist is Mr. Syed Ahsan Ali, who is partner ESG, Climate Change and Sustainability Reporting in KPMG, Pakistan. Next panelist is Ms. Nazish Sheikha, Head of Research, Pakistan Business Council. Then we have Mr. Muhammad Shahzad, Director of Finance, Unilever, Pakistan. So we have one question in the chat box as well. So if you have any other question with the panelists, so we will cover that during our question and answer session. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you, Salman. I think it's at 9 o'clock. ESG means eat, sleep, and go. So, but I think we'll try to be short and just touch upon the key practical angles that have come out of this discussion and very detailed technical presentations. I think personally I've learned a lot today from the sessions of both the standards and also the question and answer sessions. I think the concepts may become more clearer as we move forward in months and years. So I think when you look at this from a very traditional point of view, the corporate reporting landscape is changing, right? It's changing from the balance sheet and P&L based reporting and financial statements concept to more broader economic value reporting. And all the factors that we have been discussing about ESG and climate and enterprise value, all that reporting will come to in one place, which will certainly enlighten investors more about a company. Now, accountants have been, playing a very central role in the corporate reporting over the years. So my question to you, Fahim, is that, how do you change, how you see the role of the profession evolving with this change in the corporate reporting?
Yes, very much. It has to, because in order to keep pace with the world, and we are part of the global village, we have to keep our reporting up to the mark. There are challenges, definitely. These standards are onerous. These are extensive standards, require a lot of data churning, data analysis, data manipulation. But gradually, slowly and gradually, we will catch. And as in the arena of financial reporting, we evolved, and we were, at one point in time, we were probably in the region first and the foremost to adopt all the accounting standards. At that time, it used to be IAS. And then the rest of the nations, and in fact, the West adopted them just recently. So in this area also, we should not lag behind. Yes, the challenges are there. The existing reporting in this area obviously requires a lot of, the gap is big, and that has to be filled by accountants. Nobody else can do that.
So accountants apparently would have to take a leading role as ESG professionals, from the financial reporting to, and that's, I think, this the biggest opportunity that the profession has today, in terms of its development and growth. So I think the next, coming towards the businesses, I think we have been talking about, a lot of pressure from the world in terms of the investors and also the capital markets and also the banks. They all are actually focusing on the sustainability targets more, and I think times to come we'll see, not only the financial results, but also the sustainability KPIs will make up more of the investment mind. In that context, I think, how do you see the Pakistani businesses responding and feeling the need of sustainability reporting? How many companies are really, thinking about ESG strategy? And I think, Nazish, you are working with Pakistan Business Council. You actually may be interacting more with the businesses in Pakistan. So do we really moving towards it, or it's really on the drawing board at this point in time?
Not directly investors right now, but just buyers, and these are the things that they're asking So we do get a lot of queries now, and this has grown. So we've been, well, I'll just give you a little background of the Pakistan Business Council and the Center of Excellence in Responsible Business. So the center was set up in 2016 at the Pakistan Business Council, and we've been sort of gathering data since 2017 on sustainability reporting. And what we've seen is that while the number of companies publishing sustainability reports has not increased before COVID, but now in 2021 we've seen a huge interest of other companies as well, that now we're supposed to be publishing a sustainability report. For a little while, the interest was towards the SDGs, but now we're seeing a direct interest now into ESG. So the Sustainable Development Goals, Dr. Shamshad mentioned a lot about them today. They also have targets and indicators, but those indicators are for our country to report on. But now when we talk about ESG, that is more related to the business. So I guess because of the way the discussion is going globally, we're also seeing it locally as well.
Okay. So, Shahzad, I think you are, Unilever is quite active in the, net zero ambition. And I think many of the companies are in this league which have announced the plans to be net zero by certain year. Working with the company, what changes have you observed in terms of the policies, actions, or processes and controls and governance, etc., towards the ESG landscape?
Arslan, Unilever's net zero ambition, in fact, by the way, for the benefit of the audience, Fahim Saab very aptly and in detail described what net zero stands for effectively. Unilever's net zero ambition is enshrined in the climate transition action plan that we sort of put to a shareholder vote 2 years ago. And it ended up getting 99% of the shareholders voting in favor of it. And fundamentally, the philosophy behind it is the fact that climate change is the single biggest threat, not just to the businesses out there, but to the consumers and society at large. And to this effect, of course, the Paris Accord, Dr. Shamshad mentioned it a couple of times, happens to be the single most ambitious climate commitment that has ever been made. Unilever has chosen to set itself completely in line with that ambition. In fact, our net zero ambition is to achieve it by 2039, 11 years ahead of the Paris Accord. And what effectively that means is that we'd be actioning it across 4 broad areas of attack, so to speak. The first one, of course, which again, referring back to Fahim Saab's presentation, covers our immediate operations, which is scope 1 and scope 2. We've achieved, as a group, Unilever globally has achieved 100% renewable electricity in January of 2020. That's out of the way. That's something that we're very proud of. But now we want to move ahead and achieve 100% renewable in our heat usage also. And that's something that we want to pursue. We hope to achieve that by 2030. Alongside, within our operations ambit, we also want to move away from the GWP or global warming potential refrigerants now to less GWP refrigerants. And to that effect, that also features as part of our net zero target. Now, that's a global ambition. I'll tell you a bit about how we have tried to respond to that locally here in Unilever Pakistan. We are about 78% on renewable electricity as a Unilever group in Pakistan. Our solar capacity to generate is about 8 megawatts, which is of which ice cream factory in Lahore is about 4.2 megawatts and is the single largest solar plant in the Unilever world. We've already reduced our carbon emissions on that front by about 77%. In terms of technology that we're deploying in our factories, our CapEx proposals in terms of manufacturing primarily, have a very clear mandate of clearing a sustainability gate, short of which our investments will not meet a certain threshold for approval. And our global, approach and our effort in moving towards cleaner energy has also led us to conclude that this can be achieved with a cost-neutral impact, which gives us a lot of confidence as we move on to our Scope 3 emissions. Now, Scope 3 emissions are by and large the biggest aspect of the emissions that the group generates globally. About 75% resides in the RM, PM, and the logistics value chain of our product portfolio. To that effect, multiple approaches are being taken. One being to move away from products primarily in our laundry and cleaning portfolio where bulk of fossil fuel related carbon is used. We want to move away from a carbon which is sourced from fossil fuels to a carbon which is renewable and recyclable. And that involves a lot of chemistry and a lot of science. And that is something that we are very actively investing in. And this, by the way, the entire net zero mandate is for the entire Unilever market, right? Which means that no single country can opt out of it. We all have to play a part. Then comes plastic, which of course is the bane of modern day existence, if I may. On that front, our ambition is to cut down the use of virgin plastic as a group by 50% by 2025, 2030, sorry. And of course, move 100% of our plastic usage across the value chain to plastic that is reusable, recyclable, and compostable. On plastics, Unilever Pakistan has made fantastic strides. Many of you may know that Unilever Pakistan has a commitment to make Rahimia Khan, which houses our first and the biggest factory in Pakistan, a plastic waste-free city by 2025. That is a bold commitment, and that is a commitment that we are proud of. We are also founding members of the Core Alliance, which aims to collect plastic, and ambition being we collect more than we put into the environment. And that is something that we are already involved in. In fact, about 4,000 kgs worth of plastic that we produce under the banner of Walls Ice Cream, we've already converted that into park benches and play areas. So that's a microcosm of all that we're trying to do, and this is an effort that we are committed to completely. The sustainability mandate towards the end, I would like to highlight, is something that the board and our chief executive directly monitors and holds itself accountable to. And as part of the Reward Connect that Fahim Saab also mentioned as part of the governance agenda, 25% of the long-term vesting of management performance shares is related directly to sustainability. So it covers all the areas. It gives me a lot of confidence that once the standards are put into place and we are able to get over the teething problems, as a unit, we'd be able to contribute very effectively towards the sustainability landscape of the country.
I think very great efforts, I would say. I think all the companies start doing it. Imagine the world would be a much better place to live in. So, Ehsan, sorry for keeping you wait. Actually, you have a very extensive experience working in ESG. Now, from a consultant point of view, I think, how do you see Pakistan market responding to the ESG in terms of our maturity level as compared to because most places in the world, I think they are all in the learning phase. But our speed of learning as compared to the others, how do you rate it?
It's better. I'll start with. Thankfully, we have Best Corporate Reporting Award. So that has actually imposed, a little pressure on all these companies and small companies, even in textile sector. In order to achieve that award, they have been in the past were attempting to comply either with GRI or IR or any other framework which is relevant. And number two thing is the pressure from parent companies. Like in case of Unilever, the whole pressure is coming from the parent company. So Unilever in Pakistan is happy to implement their Compass strategy. Why? Because there is a lot of pressure from their parent company. Similarly, for other areas, and Nazish as well, Nazish mentioned that the pressure majorly in the textile sector and pharmaceutical sector is coming from the buyer side. So usually, or maybe the supplier side or the franchisers, so they have to comply in those regions in EU and all the other areas with those local or regulations which are actually creating a pressure on our textile sector as well as pharmaceutical companies and in FMCG as well, in oil and gas sector as well, that they have to comply or they have to at least create some data or report some data to their parent companies on these particular agendas or ESG space, I'll say. So the readiness was there, but in an unstructured form. And as Dr. Shamshad also mentioned, that till to date it's voluntarily. So there is no regulatory pressure or regulatory, imposition on reporting these numbers in our financial reports. So the readiness is there, but some sort of structured approach is required. Some regulatory pressure is required, and I think then all of us will be able to report in the manner which is required by the global standards.
So do you think we should focus firstly on the high-risk industries rather than, just to be more focused on the implementation of the reporting, rather than picking every company?
True.
And, shortlist what are the 5-7 sectors that
agreed
really are high risk?
And that's the approach that is actually being discussed in the corridors of regulator and on the task force as well, in the ministries as well, that our approach could be modular approach. We can't go to everybody and ask them to apply the generalized standard. So the roadmap and the attempt till to date is actually a sectoral approach, where we have been identifying the sectors which are more vulnerable and are more impacting our environment, and then linking those to the national agenda of 2030, Pakistan's national agenda, which is in agreement with the Paris Accord. So the approach from regulatory side as well as from the pressure groups and from the sectors as well is actually the one which you are talking about, a modular approach where we are actually identifying 4 to 5 majorly contributing sectors, and then targeting them, at least starting the reporting side from those sectors, and then we'll move to or expand the scope or canvas of this whole reporting structure. So the approach is similar, which you are talking about, Arsalan, and that's I think will make more sense in Pakistan environment.
So I'll not talk more about the audit of the information, because we are at a stage where the International Assurance Standard Board is also in the process of making and shaping the standards on the audit side of the reporting, which is also equally important so that this information is more credible. And we are talking more about the qualitative information, KPIs. So much more need for audit methodologies around it. But I think I'm also conscious of the time, actually. So although it's quite a interesting discussion, and but I think in the interest of the time, and so we'd like to conclude this session. Thank you very, very much for all of you gathering here for us. Thanks. I think.
Thank you very much, all the panelists and the moderator, Arslan. Now I would like to request Farrukh Rahman Saab and Usama Rashid to please come and give the souvenirs to all the panelists and the moderator, please. First, I would like to request Sayyid Fahimul Hassan Saab, please come forward. Sayyid Ahsan Ali, sir, please come and take your souvenir. Nazir Sheikha, please. Mr. Mohammad Shahzad. Mr. Arsalan Khalid. Now I request Mr. Sohail Malik to please give a souvenir to Mr. Farooq Rahman, sir. In the end, Mr. Farooq Rahman will give the vote of thanks and will share a few words before we move on with the dinner. Thank you.
Thank you, Salman. I think at this time I need to be extremely brief. बहुत ही क्विकली आपको मैं एक दो बातें बता दूं कि सस्टेनेबिलिटी का जो टॉपिक है वो हम सब के लिए नया है, मुश्किल है, इसकी अभी रिसेप्टेबिलिटी कम है। हमारे कंपनीज़ के अंदर वाइडर पैमाने के ऊपर इसके स्ट्रक्चर डेटा सिस्टम्स नहीं हैं। ये हम सब के लिए एक चैलेंज है, बट दुनिया में बहुत तेज़ी से इस पर डेवलपमेंट हो रही है और इसको फॉर बेटर अंडरस्टैंडिंग please do not take this or relate this specific to climate. Climate is just one of the themes, एक subject है ये इसका, और इसकी materiality for entity to entity may vary. So अभी जैसे फ़हीम ने present किया था, तो वो एक अगर हम routinely या ordinarily देखें तो वो एक difficult standard है, but अंडरस्टैंड करने के लिए चीज़ ये है कि नाउ द वर्ल्ड इज सेइंग that the information which is the financial reporting up till now is not good enough. Now the world needs information, financial information, as well as sustainability related information as well. So together is what going to give us the required information for today's environment, something on which we can, investor, governments, everybody can use it and make decisions. तो अभी के लिए आज आपने सब सुन लिया, S1 क्या है, S2 क्या है, डॉक्टर शमशाद का आपने I think probably one of the most comprehensive टॉक इस सब्जेक्ट के ऊपर पाकिस्तान के अंदर अभी तक मैंने नहीं सुनी है, सो वो आपने नोट कर लिया. वंडरफुल डिस्कशन, बिग थैंक यू टू यूनिलीवर, पाकिस्तान बिजनेस काउंसिल, डॉक्टर शमशाद, माय कोलीग फ़हीम, सोहेल, एहसन, हमारे क्या नाम है, अरसलान, so everyone who have participated. आप लोगों का भी आना, it's a difficult topic, I know. So we have just started a beginning. There is a working group इंस्टीट्यूट में जिसको हमने फॉर्म किया है. ये प्रपोज स्टैंडर्ड है. 29th जुलाई को वी नीड टू सबमिट comments. We'll be having our meeting. ये सारा जो टेक अवे है we'll build into our comment letter to ISSB. ISSB, a big thank you to ISSB as well. I think it एक टाइम निकालना और ख़ास तौर पे पाकिस्तान जैसे उसके लिए आई थिंक अगेन उनका बहुत शुक्रिया. उन्होंने पार्टिसिपेट किया, क्वेश्चंस का आंसर्स किए. So 29th July को we'll submit our comments, and then we'll be drawing our strategy of how to take this forward. We have identified the stakeholders. उस stakeholder के अंदर हमें engage करना है. उनको we have to create awareness. We have to build capacity, and then of course जो feedback है इन सब process का we'll be building into our strategy. So inshallah we'll more be seeing each other इस context में. We have a really good group of people now dealing with this sustainability reporting. We have industry, we have profession with us, और SSCP भी on board है, स्टेट बैंक के साथ भी हम linked हैं, वर्ल्ड में हम ISSB के साथ भी linked हैं, इंशाल्लाह फ्यूचर में IFAC के साथ भी हम लोग linked हैं, उनके लोग भी हमें इसमें involved होंगे. एजुकेशन स्टैंडर्ड्स भी जो हैं वो अपडेट हो रहे हैं. मैं लास्ट वीक जो है वो IFAC में था, एंड जो इंटरनेशनल एजुकेशन बोर्ड चेयरमैन है वो भी वहाँ 2 दिन हमारे साथ रही, और सस्टेनेबिलिटी वाज वन ऑफ द लीडिंग टॉपिक दैट वी डिस्कस. तो वो भी एजुकेशन के रिलेटेड भी ये चीज़ें आ रही है. सो जस्ट टू कंक्लूड बाय सेइंग स्टे ट्यून्ड, एंड इंस्टीट्यूट की वेबसाइट के ऊपर एक सस्टेनेबिलिटी का टैब है. यू विल कंटिन्यू टू सी ऑल द डेवलपमेंट्स हैपनिंग एट द इंस्टीट्यूट. और ये एक मल्टी स्टेक होल्डर ग्रुप है जिनको मैंने आइडेंटिफाई कर दिया है. सो टुगेदर इंशाल्लाह वी विल अचीव समथिंग फॉर द सस्टेनेबिलिटी रिपोर्टिंग. थैंक यू.